Okay, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'd like to call the Physician Assistant Board meeting to order. We're meeting today, January 23rd, 2017, in 2005 Evergreen Street, Hearing Room 1150. The first item on the agenda is to perform roll call. Julie Caldwell, please.
Charles Alexander,
Present.
Michael Bishop,
Here.
Jennifer Carlquist, here. Sonia Early, here. Javier Escobar Acosta,
Here.
Jed Grant,
Here.
Catherine Hazelton,
Here.
Xavier Martinez,
Here.
Robert Sachs,
Here.
Mary Valencia,
Here.
Okay, we have a full quorum. Thank you, everybody, for coming and braving the bad weather. And thank you to all of our guests in the audience. The next item will be agenda item number 3, approval of the October 2016 minutes. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Just one minor thing. I noticed that my name was spelled wrong on a number of motions. It's a C, not a K.
Okay.
No, it's fine. I just felt weird voting for it when I knew it was false.
So you're agreeing that your name is spelled wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can make that change. Further discussion? Public comment? Okay, I will take a vote. Dr. Alexander?
Aye.
Jennifer Caldwell?
Aye.
Sonia Early?
Aye.
Javier Escobar Acosta?
Aye.
Jed Grant?
Aye.
Catherine Hazelton?
Aye.
Xavier Martinez?
Aye.
Robert Sachs? Aye. Mary Valencia?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are passed. Item number 4, public comments. Public comments on items not on the agenda. The board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section that is not included on this agenda, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. And that's Government Code Section 11125 and 11125.7A. Next item on the agenda is President's Report. Public comment? Okay, next item is President's Report. First thing, I want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our staff, Anita, Julie, and Lynn. They have been running a 5-person office with 3 and have been bombed with multiple tasks that are above and beyond what their normal jobs are, and they have done a fantastic job, so thank you to the 3 of you. And hopefully the numbers will increase soon. Next item is number 1, medical professions requirements for national certification and recertification. I have Lynn do a poll of all of the various boards in the medical professions to see if they all require national certification, and they do, but also to find out how many of the boards require recertification. And it was 100% that none of the boards require recertification. So that's just an information item moving forward. So we are consistent with the other boards for not requiring recertification. And with that, that concludes my report. Public comment? Okay, that's good.
Although they may not require specifically the title of recertification, they certainly have been requiring, it's called not mandatory, but it's becoming de jure mandatory in terms of the maintenance of certification, and especially the medical board, the Board of Medicine, not the Medical Board of California, but the Board of Medicine that does testing for them, has come under a lot of fire because their exam was really not well received. The requirements of the exam and also the other certification process seemed, at least visually, to be a way for them to make money. And it didn't seem to reflect the reality of recertification. So they are revising that, as are a lot of the boards now. So it's just, although they may not require it specifically for quote recertification, this maintenance of certification is a big issue out there now.
Okay.
So,
and we accomplished that by requiring continuing medical education every 2 years.
This was a more formal examination process, which included testing and other things like the CME credits, but also included some testing as well.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, we will go on to item B, Executive Officers Report. Lynn Forsythe.
Good morning, everybody. It's been a crazy and very hectic few months in the office. A lot's been going on. We assisted the Department of Motor Vehicles in an audit on signatures of PAs that were issuing parking plaques. We were notified that DCA has an internal audit division, and our office is being audited. And that will be every phase, every procedure, everything that happens in the office, they will be going over. You'll get a presentation on that this afternoon, so a little bit more information there. I was fortunate enough to have been asked by Kim Kirchmeyer of the Medical Board to be part of a presentation to the Department of Health, and that was on the enforcement and the complaints that come into the office and how they're handled and the decisions as far as they're made. Staffing, as you know, there's only 3 of us. We posted for the OT position. We did interviews. We made offers to 4 people. They either declined for full-time work or weren't reachable. We went back out, reposted, and we have made an offer to an individual. As soon as we get all of the clearances, I hope to have that person starting February 1st. And that will be for our part-time OT licensing position. We just finished posting for our enforcement AGPA position, and I'll be doing interviews for that on Monday of next week. Also, Anita just finished doing 6 months of CME audit letters that went out. That was close to 300. So the 3 of us have been brainstorming. If one procedure doesn't work correctly, we've been coming up with something else. So I really want to thank Julie and Anita for all their hard work and determination in getting this done. And that's the end of my report.
Okay. Comments from the board? Public comment? Next item will be licensing. Anita Winslow.
Good morning. As of the 10th of January from our last meeting in October, we have received 203 applications and initial applications and have processed 238. So we had some in the queue previous to that hadn't been licensed. We had a tremendous influx of initial licenses in December. We were averaging 30 to 40 licenses a week having to issue. Renewals, as you can see, we got 1,198 renewals processed during that 3-month time. And any questions?
Public comment? Okay.
Oh, total. I'm sorry. We have a total of 11,204 licenses.
And could you tell us a turnaround time for an initial licensee on average, how long it takes you to issue a license?
It varies. It can be as little as 2 weeks, but we're probably averaging about 30 days when we take into consideration those people that have to submit fingerprint cards instead of doing live scan, because that's a minimum of 2 weeks. But I reviewed about 15 licenses last week, and it was an initial review, and I was able to put half of them in the licensing queue, and that's a 2-week turnaround for those people. So some of them are really surprised. So we're trying to get them out if the documentations, especially if they're newly graduated and they don't have additional verifications that they need, then they can get a license in as little as 2 weeks.
That's great. Thank you for your hard work doing that.
I think I
Don't-
missed your diversion.
don't go
I know, don't go
anywhere,
anywhere. Sorry.
Okay, next will be
Pardon me,
diversion program.
question.
Anita
So-
Winslow. Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Question.
Catherine.
In the past, have we had comparative data from other points in time about the numbers of licenses, initial applications, and renewals?
I have that old data. Yeah, I can actually bring that to the next board meeting if you'd like. Do you want previous months or years or?
I think we've seen in the past it's allowed us to create some mental trend lines and understand how these data compare to past quarters and past years, and it's just, I think, helpful for us to have a better context for what these data mean.
Okay, so do you want initial licenses total, or do you want it by quarter? Because I can do both.
I mean, I find it helpful to compare to past years, but
Okay.
I mean, whatever makes sense to you. I don't know if others on the board have other thoughts, but it's, especially when we're looking at total number of licensees and others, it's helpful for us to understand how the numbers are moving.
Okay,
Anita?
yes, sir.
It might be helpful to have it by quarter because different times that PA schools graduate.
Right,
So your workload could be outrageous one quarter and lighter the next, so.
right.
maybe
Like
having it-
December, we get a tremendous influx, and then again in May and June, we get a very big influx of applicants.
Right, so it might be helpful in terms of staffing and
Mm-hmm.
staff burden to have a screen.
Sure.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so further discussion, public comment? We'll go on to diversion. Anita?
We've, as of January 1st, 2017, we have 5 voluntary referrals, 11 board referrals, and a total of 16 participants, which is up 2 from last year. Total intakes for the program to date is 144. Closed cases, we've closed out 124, so, but we still, cases. Does anybody have any questions?
Public comment? Thank you. Okay, next item will be agenda item 5E, Enforcement Program Activity Report. Lynn Forsythe?
Okay, for this past quarter, from October through December 31st, we put 3 people on probation. We had 1 license surrender. 2 probationary licenses were issued, and that would be a first-time applicant. We filed 5 accusations, and 1 accusation was dismissed. We initiated 5 cases at the Attorney General's office, and we've got 40 that are currently pending. Cite and fines, we have 11 pending from the last fiscal year, with $3,200 that were issued in fines. This quarter, we did not receive any funds in on that. My probationers, currently I have 54 that are active and 5 told. For this 3-month period, we received 108 complaints. We closed 3 without any investigation, and we assigned for investigation 115. And that's the end of enforcement.
Okay, board member questions?
I do have a question. In the event that someone doesn't pay, how do you secure those funds?
We send it to FTB. So we send it over there and we have them do a lien.
Okay.
That's how we get them.
All right, thank you.
Just-
Are we ever gonna have an aging status again on
Yes,
the cases that are out? We
Yes,
used to
we
have
will.
it, and then when Breeze popped in, we lost it.
yeah, it's being worked on, so
Okay.
yes.
Excellent.
I think we mentioned this last time, but in terms of complaints, are you seeing any trends, types, and numbers? Are they increasing, staying the same?
Our complaints are increasing. Julie, who does our complaints in the central complaint unit, she's receiving more complaints than ever. And it's internet. A lot of them are drug-related. Some of them are quality of care. So yeah, they are increasing.
Is there a way to get a breakdown on maybe broad categories that the complaints are in,
We should be able to, yes.
maybe for the next meeting?
Okay.
Is it for overprescribing or underprescribing that
Over.
you're seeing?
Overprescribed.
Yeah.
Other board member questions? Public comment? Okay. Item number 6 is discussion and possible action regarding CME audit and process. Anita Winslow and myself.
I'm sorry. I felt way too small here. A little background as to what we've entailed with the CME audits, so that you know how we come up with the numbers that we select. The program is written that we select 1/12 of 5% of our licensees per month. And this averages about 45 to 50 letters a month. They're always generated on the 15th of the month. It's only selected out of, they have to have a specific type of status for their license, so they either have to have a current license that has temporary family support suspension, or suspension. So if you have a license that falls within those categories and you renew, then you can be selected for the audit. They have people that aren't selected, their status is inactive, permanent CE waiver, if they've already been passed for the CE audit, or if they've already been selected for the CE audit. So they can't be selected for the audit more than 4 years. So if they're selected once, they won't be selected, they don't get thrown back into the queue for 4 years. Lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. That's the background for the audit. I'd like to get some input about the audit letter. I do believe we gave you a secondary one instead of the one that came with the packet. There should have been a new one that was put out to you. We have been going round and round. There is nothing in our laws and regs that tell us what we can do if somebody does not respond to the audit letter. There's something we can do if they don't comply with CME. We can put them in an inactive status. So if somebody's not nationally certified and I get their CME certificates and they don't equal the 50 hours that are required, I automatically put them in an inactive status, send them a certified letter that says you are now in an inactive status, you have not complied with CMEs, you have until your next renewal cycle to renew, but you will remain in inactive until you comply. And I tell them how many hours they're still missing. And once I receive those hours, I will change their status back to current and put them in as a pass for the CME. The initial CME audit letter that goes out has been a thorn for us because we haven't been able to. So I was wondering if anybody has any input, if they've read the letter, if they have any comments. Javier, I know you got one. You got the original letter. It's a lot different than what it was. We had a lot of complaints that licensees didn't understand the letter, what they were supposed to do to comply, so we tried to make it a little bit more detailed. I don't know if anybody has any comments about how this should change, if it should change, if everybody's satisfied with it.
Can I just ask a brief question in terms of how we select them? Is it computer generated or is it manually done?
It is computer generated.
Okay. And it's 1/12 of?
5% of our total licensees.
Okay. For that month?
For that month,
For that
yes,
month,
ma'am.
okay.
So if my math is right, which I have my shoes on, so I'm not sure it is, that's about 500 people a year that we're auditing, is that correct?
It's 5% of our total licensees, yes. Total. So if we have 11,000 licensees, 5% of that would be,
A little over 500.
yeah.
So is that a standard, that just seems like a lot of people to audit per year, to me. I don't know if that's an average number or not.
We weren't sure, I mean, the Med Board, I believe, they only audit 1%, but they have almost 200,000 licensees.
Do we have the man or woman power to do this right now, or how does that?
In all honesty, the letter is not very difficult. I mean, the Breeze generates the spreadsheet, and all I convert it to an Excel, and I do a mail merge.
Okay.
So the longest amount of time is printing out the letters and stuffing the envelopes, which normally takes about 30 minutes to an hour
Right.
once a month.
But I'm worried about the information coming back.
The information comes back in dribs and drabs. So if you do it on a daily basis, you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 10 letters a day. It's simple to go in. I mean, we open up their account and enter that they've passed and file it.
Okay.
So it takes about, if they're
So it's more of a
nationally certified,
compliance.
if they're nationally certified, it's as simple of just putting in the pass.
Okay.
If not, and we have to count, I mean, it could take 10 minutes to count somebody's CME
Okay.
certificates that they turn in. It's going to be turned over to our OT
Right.
when she starts. I think she'll have plenty of time to handle it.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Is there any way to automate this where the providers send it directly into a website or something? So, I mean, for my license, that's what I do with the IRS. Once I take continuing education, the provider sends it into the IRS. And on my account, I can see exactly how many hours I have per year.
If we had to do that, we'd have to keep track of everybody, and that we do not
Well,
have
that's
this
what I'm saying,
manpower
getting-
for. Yeah, we don't. We don't have the manpower to keep track of it. It's easier because I would say 90% of our people are NCCPA certified. So,
just a question.
because they're nationally certified,
automated.
they have to submit their CMEs with the NCCPA. So when they get our audit letter, all they have to do is check the box that says they're nationally certified, and they send it back to us. We go to the website, open the portal, and we print out a verification letter. It's, for the amount of CME certificates we have to count, it's not worth it for us.
So can I just make a general question? Are we doing double the work since most of the people who are 90% already certified, and we go through this through the NCCPA? Do we need to do this, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because some of them let their certification lapse. So if they don't have all their CMEs in by the end of the year when they're supposed to, if they don't meet their deadline with the NCCPA,
Right.
then.
I
and
totally
they-
understand that. So is our population that we are selecting, are they non-certified PAs, or is it random?
It's random. I have no, I don't, they have to tell me. I'm not sure what their status is.
I guess so. To me, it seems like double the work. Maybe if we could get that population and then randomize those, that would be a little bit better, or, I don't know. That's just a.
Yeah, it's hard because we would have to actually ask everybody to respond on a renewal.
Right.
To be able to say, yes, I'm NCCPA certified. So it's.
No, I understand. I
yeah.
just think from my standpoint, for the people who are certified, it's double the work, or it doesn't seem to obtain the information that is rightfully needed. The people who are not certified, it seems like they should be able to, we should be monitoring them.
Well, they're
But-
the ones that we're catching.
Okay.
They're the ones that we're catching, and I've, out of the 400 letters or so that I've sent out, I've had to put 3 people on inactive.
No, I totally understand. I'm just thinking the
So that's-
randomization of it.
That's
it
not
seems like-
bad, it's 1%.
Right.
You know, in our first group, we're looking at 1% that we're not complying. But then we're catching the people that get the letter, and then they have actually falsified their renewal document. and they've done their CMEs.
Right.
Since they have 65 days to respond to the CME audit, they'll do all their CMEs in that 65 days
Right.
and send in the certificates, and then they could just go right to cite and fine. Because they've falsified their renewal document. So, and I'm not gonna make them inadequate because they've complied, because they
Right.
have until their next renewal cycle to comply.
Right.
But because they falsified, it's unprofessional conduct, and we'll cite and fine them.
Right. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Were you done, Cindy?
No, I said thank you.
Oh, okay. You said there's no way to do anything if they don't respond to the letter. Did I understand you correctly?
That was my question to the board. We don't have any way to do anything to these people if they don't respond.
Isn't?
Yes, please.
So it's not that the board can't do anything to these people, it's just not explicit in the regs. So basically, if you don't respond, they can be cited under, because the EO has very broad cite and fine authority. So Lynn can issue a cite and fine saying, hey, we sent you this, you didn't respond, here's your citation. If they still don't respond, then you can then you can take it further and do an accusation. So it's just not explicit in the regs. So if you want something very specific to happen for failure to respond to the audit, then we would need to update the regs. Does that make sense to everybody, or do you have any further questions?
I thought there was something in the reg about unprofessional behavior, not cooperating with the board or not responding to the board.
There is.
Wouldn't this fall under that?
The regulation does say it's unprofessional not to comply. It doesn't say not to comply with the audit. It says not to comply with completing your CMEs. That's where the issue is, because there's nothing in the regulation that says this is the consequence if you don't reply to the letter. If you get a CME audit and you don't reply, there's nothing in the regulations that says this is what we can do to you.
It doesn't, I agree with you, because it's not explicit in the regs, but I don't want the board to think that there's nothing that they can do, because there is. They can issue a cite and fine and then take appropriate next steps. I know, I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. I don't want you guys to freak out.
Yeah.
But yes, there is something that you can do to ensure compliance, or at least to compel compliance.
So does that, this question to the board staff, does that process work okay for you? That, okay, you didn't answer, so here's your citation and fine, and we'll move on from there? Or is this something that the staff would appreciate having more leverage with a regulatory change? Or
I personally, if they don't respond to the letter, I think it's just as much as them not complying with their CME requirement. And if they're sending in certificates and they don't equal, and we put them on an inactive status because the regulation says we can. If you've paid your renewal and you haven't complied with your CME requirement, then we can make you inactive. The regulation does say that, but we have to have proof of compliance. So when they send in their certificates and they're short, how many hours they're ever short, we automatically can make them inactive, which we do, and send them a certified letter that states you're now inactive, you can't practice until you complete it. But there's nothing that we can be that specific with if they don't comply with the letter.
I understand. I'm just asking if the current process of they haven't responded, so we issue them a cite and fine, if that works adequately for the staff.
We haven't issued any cite and fines yet, because we've been trying to figure out the process. We've been going back and forth with legal, trying to figure out what we could do, what we can't do. So our next step, if the board's okay with it, will be, we'll start issuing cite and fines. You know,
As staff, I don't know if a cite and fine is enough for these guys, in all honesty. When I sent out letters that said, you have 30 days or you're gonna be inactive, I got responses overnight. Now, why these people couldn't respond when they got their initial letter, I don't know. But I had to threaten, and it was improper, okay? I've found through legal that I really can't make them inactive. But if we could update the reg or put it on the next agenda to possibly bring in some language to update the regulation that if they don't respond to the CME audit, that we can make them inactive within 30 days. I mean, now we're giving them 95 days to respond. If they don't respond and we give them another 30 before we're going to make them inactive, they've actually had 90 days to respond to an audit letter. That's plenty of time, in my opinion. So I honestly don't know if a cite and fine is enough. And that's, yeah.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What is the fine?
I
mean,
that's the other
That's
thing.
something Ileana and I were kind of discussing last week. Yeah.
there's no dollar amount on the fine, it just says cite and fine.
Well, no, I would put a dollar amount on there. We just haven't come to a decision as to, you take it. Yeah.
Well,
That's what she
basically,
said, 'cause we haven't done it.
well, here's the thing. The reg that indicates how much fine should be basically says you can fine someone just in general if you're going to issue a cite and fine from $100 to $5,000. I think that's the range. And then the other part of that reg says here's these 7 factors for the EO to consider in deciding how much that fine should be. Because this is the first time you guys have done an audit, and this is now Lynn has to figure out how much she needs to charge for this or what the fine should be. So this is still very early on in the process. But again, there's 7 factors for her to consider, and the range is huge from what point, from 100 to 5,000. So how egregious is the conduct, and all of those other factors that you need to consider. So it's still early on. If the board wants to decide that X amount should be the amount that's fined, then we can update the reg to do that. So it's a lot of options. Does that answer your question?
Yes. thank
Okay.
you.
So would it be appropriate to make a motion to direct the staff to draft language for what?
And on a future agenda, yes.
Okay. So I'll make the motion to have the staff draft language for the response to a failure to respond to the audit letter. And then we'll maybe have a future agenda item to review that and implement it.
I second.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Further discussion?
Would that include language as to the amount of a fine if you don't respond, or just?
We can include it.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should also include in that a discussion of what notification means, knowing that, not everyone reads their mail, and, that there are other ways to contact people, and one letter by post might not be the best. So just if we can include that, what that definition is.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I do have a question about your comment. What were you thinking in terms of how to reach out to people? Because right now we can't require email addresses. We can't require. So basically, any time that we want to reach out to our licensees, it would be via mail. I mean, it's certified mail if that's what you want to do, but that's usually how it's done. So I'm just curious if you had any specific ideas, and I can look in to see whether we can do that.
I don't have specific ideas. I just wanted to be able to have a discussion about it, whether and maybe we don't name what the other form of contact is, but there's like an alternative form of contact, or or there's a specific, if we want to talk about the number of notifications or what the spacing of those notifications are, or whatever our method is for notification. I think it'd be helpful for us to have that conversation of how we define that.
Perfect. Thanks.
I have a question. Is that something that Breeze can handle?
No.
Don't we have the?
No, that's something that we have to do manually. Breeze will generate the address of record only. I was sending out secondary notices to people that were not responding to the original letter. So the original letter goes out snail mail. And when I had to send out a second letter that says, hey, you didn't respond to my first letter, those people that had email addresses, I attached that letter as a PDF and sent a certified letter. But not everybody has an email address on file, so it's very difficult. The ones that did were very grateful that I emailed them that letter, because they said, well, I never got my CME audit letter. I think they did, but they just tended not to. Anyway, so those that did have an email, I sent a certified letter for the second request, and I backed it up with an email.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful input that I think it's awesome that you did that. If there's someone in the future in your position who isn't required to do that, they might not need to, and that might be
Right.
the most effective way to get to people. So maybe we want to include that as, something like, if we have their email on file, they should also receive an email, or, for us to discuss, I think, these different
Okay.
methods. I don't know if this is the right time to do that, and we should probably save it for next time, but I think you're suggesting to us that's, people would appreciate the email.
Right. One other thing is, if they don't respond to the letter, when their renewal cycle comes up, they're technically, and I don't know if this is allowable through reg, but if they don't respond, they're not allowed to renew until they prove compliance with the audit. So what I have to do now is I have to keep a spreadsheet with everybody's renewal date on it, and those that don't renew 90 days before, because the system, we're in the process of doing a work order to update the audit system because it's not working perfectly. It's supposed to not create a renewal document for those that don't respond to the CME audit. So 90 days when their renewal documents are generated, I have to manually go into the system and put a manual hold on their renewal. So even if they pay their fees and send in their renewal application or go online to renew, it will not renew them until they send in their compliance for the CME audit. And that gives them 2 years.
Can I commend you for doing such a great job? I am amazed that we do not have an email system with the new Breeze system, so I'm a little.
We do have an email system,
yeah.
but not everybody supplies us with an email.
It's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory.
It's mandatory that they keep their address of record
On
updated,
file.
which a lot of them don't do. But it's not mandatory for
Can
the
we-
email.
Right. So there isn't a secondary way to contact them because people move and things like that? I
Nope.
just commend you for doing
We
such a
can-
great job because
We can put out an email blast. I can do a blast and recommend that everybody contact the board with a current email, and that would be a secondary way for us to contact them.
Well, I think this is just good conversation for us because these things we did not know. And so
Yeah,
is there any way we can make that mandatory on Breeze? No?
No,
Okay.
And Breeze does send out emails. For those that have an email in their address of record,
Right.
they will get an email stating, hey, it's time to renew. They get an email that's 90 days before. When the renewal document is generated, they get an email that says it's time to renew. They get an email, their monthly renewal that says, hey, you have 30 days to complete this. And then at the end of that 30 days, they'll get a third email that says, you didn't renew, you're now delinquent. And they will get an email when they do renew that says, congratulations, your renewal has been completed.
All right.
So,
Well, I think it just aids for good conversation of what we need to do to make the process a little bit more
if
streamlined.
you would like, I can put out a blast on our blast list.
Probably for a later day, I think we should probably discuss what's best and how not to create more work for the staff, the minimal staff that we do have.
Okay.
I think one thing that would
That's
solve
great.
part of the problem is when you send the initial notice of an audit,
Uh-huh,
send it certified mail with return receipt requested.
I can do that.
Then we know, A, they got it for sure, or we mailed it to an incorrect address because they haven't updated their address with us. And then we have an option of going forward with them violating the fact that they haven't kept the board
We
informed with their address, and that essentially should eliminate the second letter, because I think if you get something certified that you have to sign for, there's no excuse that, oh, I didn't get it.
Right. We did reach out to the people, when the letters came back as undeliverable, we went into the system, if they had a phone number or an email address, we did contact them before we sent out the second letter. Because they came back with a bad address, we came back and sent them a copy of 1399.511, which says, by law, you're required to keep a change of address, and we sent them their audit letter. So we did reach out to those if we could, when the letters came back as undeliverable.
Well, and part of our problem too is, as all of you know, when somebody works for a large corporation or a large hospital, they may use that as their address of record, and somebody in the central mailroom may say, I don't know this individual, and they return it. So we get it back to us, then we're thinking we have a bad address, and then the licensee calls and says, no, that's my work address. So that's the other issue that we deal with.
Do we have the ability to text message? Sorry. Do we have the ability to text message? Okay.
No. No.
All things we need to talk about at a later meeting, I'm sure.
I think you do on Breeze, because you can do a phone
Right.
call
I
off
thought we
of
could on
the
Breeze.
system. But we don't know if that's a cell phone or a home phone, so you
Right.
can't accept a text on a home phone,
It-
and not
Doesn't
everybody.
it say cell phone or and home
No.
phone?
And not everybody is required, they don't,
That's
it's
not
an
required.
option, they don't
Right.
have to give it to us, I don't have one on file for everybody.
Right. No, I'm saying in Breeze, doesn't it say cell phone, home phone?
No.
Nope, just says phone.
All good thoughts,
Okay.
but I think right now the regs are clear. Your address has to be kept up to date.
Correct.
And I think it's great that we're reaching out in these additional ways, but the licensees have a responsibility. And the reason for that responsibility is precisely so that we can contact them.
Right.
So I think the certified letter is a great idea, and then we can talk about other things. It's great to add those things, but they're sort of the icing on the cake, and the cake is give us your current
Make
address.
sure you have a good record.
Um,
Does anybody have anything else on this?
I just want to chime in. Thank you, Jed, for saying that, because I was waiting for everybody to be done. Yeah, it is the licensee's responsibility. As a member of the state bar, I have to tell them within 30 days where I am. So if I change jobs, or if I move, or my address of record changes. So it's on me as a licensee to do that. And I know as a professional that I have to do that. And, you know, PAs are the same, educated group of people. They should be able to follow the rules. So if they're not keeping their address up, issue them a cite and fine. Just, it's just part of the process. And I mean, all boards have to deal with this, and it stinks, but it's what it is.
I think as we, our mission is enforcement, and as we do this kind of thing, this is good. This is our mission. This is what we do, but we need to make sure that we have adequate staff to do all of these things. So I think it's important that we all appreciate your hard work. All of three of you are working incredibly hard. I think it's important that you come back to the board and give us an honest appraisal of the help that you need to accomplish this mission,
Okay,
so that we're meeting our mission.
okay,
Right? If you need help, we need to know.
all right.
Okay, we have an agenda,
We have a
or,
motion.
I'm sorry, a motion.
Oh, we have to call the
Well,
roll.
there was a motion that Jed had made earlier. What do you want to do with that? And that Sonia had seconded. Where are we on that one? Do you want to keep that motion on the table, or do you
Right,
want to
we're-
amend it at all?
I think the motion was to direct the staff to come back with a plan for what they want to do when there's no response to an audit letter, if I'm correct.
Right,
Yeah.
that,
And-
and,
and that-
and the dollar amount of the fine.
Right. Was that in the motion as well?
That wasn't in the motion. That's what I was wondering. I thought
Okay.
maybe you'd want to add that,
Yeah,
or
if we could add that, and
Um,
also a recommended dollar amount for the fine
okay.
from
And
the
then
staff.
also, I think Catherine had mentioned something about what notice means.
Right,
Are you talking about notice from us to them, or notice from them to us?
from us to them,
Okay.
defining what our notice is.
Okay.
Which
So,
I think
wanna-
we mentioned would be certified letter, but if the staff could clarify that as part of the motion, how we're defining notification.
Okay. So, sorry. So if you want to amend your motion to include all of those things, just say so in.
I would like to so amend.
Perfect. And Sonia, are you still on?
I'd like to second
Okay.
with the amending.
Great, thanks.
I would just like to ask, if we put a dollar amount in, can we give the executive officer some discretion as to the amount, depending upon how much of a hassle it's been to get the licensee to respond? If we put a specific amount down,
A range, you're talking about a
I'm
range?
talking more of a range, so that we don't have to come back 2 years later and say, okay, costs have gone way up, and this is
So-
one additional way to get some extra revenue.
I don't understand a lot about the cite and fine process. Isn't there, there's already a huge range of 1 to 5,000, and there's already criteria for the EO to decide how much the fine needs to be. Do we have to define it as a part of this, or can we just continue to leave that in the hands of the EO?
It's up to the board.
Well,
Well-
let's keep it simple and just leave that in the hands of the EO in terms of the amount of the fine, if that's okay.
I mean, staff can come back at the next meeting with some proposed language, and you guys can play with it a little and make changes, at the next meeting, and then
Okay,
we
so,
can kind of flesh out what the
so
board
if-
is looking for.
so we'll leave the motion as it is, but then maybe at the next meeting, we can figure out how we wanna proceed. What do you think, Catherine? Does that sound okay?
I'm confused. I thought you had amended your motion to include the fee and the notification.
Yeah, that's correct.
That motion you want to leave as it is?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Further discussion?
In the notification, are we notifying them as to how it's written, including either the general information about Breeze, and are we including alternative ways to contact them in that notification?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So Catherine mentioned define the term notification. So in that, you're talking about the letter and I'm assuming how explicit it is of that information and what we need to do in order to contact them. I think maybe where the problem is that when Breeze came on board, I thought it was a godsend in the sense of all the information was going to be computerized, and with that, the general information that we normally include on our licensing information, plus the computerized aspect. And I guess now I'm finding out that it isn't working as I thought. And I think maybe the entire CAPA world or, the PA world is not, they're thinking maybe the same thing that I'm thinking. So that was just an eye opener. So with it, I'm wondering, excuse me, with the notification, what does that include? It will include additional information on how we,
Just a certified letter.
oh, it's just a certified letter. Okay, can we,
Well,
Well, I think that's what we're
for
gonna
them to
discuss.
define it, right?
Okay.
And then we'll discuss it at the
okay,
next meeting.
all right, great. I just want to make sure that was included. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion? Public comment?
I have a comment and a couple questions. So of the 50 a month, you do 50 of these letters a month?
More like 45, but yeah,
And 90% of those typically are NCCPA certified.
correct.
So if you send a certified letter to each of these people, which I think a certified letter is $6 or $8,
That's
Yep,
if you look up on the NCCPA site, which takes about 38 seconds, you'll know if they're certified. Now you only have to send 6 letters.
That was my comment, because basically you're correct. The percentage of people that aren't responding or that we're getting incorrect addresses, out of that 45, we could average maybe 5, 6, 7. So to go to the expense of sending a certified letter to everybody, I mean, we are getting majority of compliance. I think the initial hurdle in this process was the language of the letter and how ambiguous it was with what do I do with this, what do I do with this? And now that we've really streamlined it and said, if you're in this situation, this is what you need to do, and if you're in this situation, you need to do this. I know that working on this letter with Anita and talking to a lot of people, that we understand that it was confusing, but I think it's pretty clear now. And when you're certified with the NCCPA, it really isn't adding a tremendous amount of time or burden on the PA. It's a matter of reading through the letter and saying, I'm certified. I gotta check that box, sign it, and mail it back, and it's
Okay.
off my plate.
But why not
Okay.
just look them up? And,
Because
I mean,
we
even
don't
if it's
know
not
that.
certified.
We don't know, well, I'm not gonna go through the NCCPA's website for those 45 people before I send it out, and we need a signature on that form, because we're asking them to provide proof of why they responded yes on the audit letter. So that's 2-part component. It's what were you and how does it provide me that proof, and also sign the letter and date it. So you're the one providing that information to us. We're not collecting it on your behalf because it's your responsibility to provide compliance. So that's the 2-part with the letter, is why we don't take the time to look them up, is because we still need to collect that signature. So when we do get the letters back in the mail, we look them up. And we just print off the letter and we attach it to our CME letter and put them in the system as pass. So it really doesn't take us that much time to do it that end, but we do need the signature on the audit letter. So for us to do it ahead of time, we still need to collect the signature. So,
But going back to Sonia's point earlier, if you could whittle it down and know of your 50,
mhm.
you've looked on the NCCPA, they are currently certified. Now you're really only auditing people, I mean, I guess I guess I get why you have to do it, but it would be nice if that could be streamlined. Your time and money, even if it's not a certified letter, it takes time to print a letter, put it in the mail, hoping the member or hoping the licensee opens their mail, because I know my mail is not what people do now. It just never gets in their hands, right or wrong. So if you already can whittle that down because you know from the site that they're certified, but I understand that probably can't be done. The other question is, when you get these certificates, do you call like I get calls, and when NCCPA audits you, and someone's provided them a CAPA CME certificate, which is very easy to photocopy, Photoshop, whatever. I get calls from NCCPA that says, I have a certificate from Jennifer Carlquist who said she attended your conference in 2013. Did she? Now I go to my records and I confirm with the NCCPA that yes, that certificate is valid, not that you photoshopped it and sent it in.
I do not go through that. I honestly don't have the time, and I'm hoping that our PAs are honest enough to only send me certificates of classes that they actually attended.
Oh.
So I'm taking them for their word that they have attended these classes.
It's like our probationers, the ones that are required to take certain classes while they're on probation. Let's say it's a ethics or medical record keeping, something along that line. We don't verify it. They have to send us the certificate, and yes, it's only through approved programs, but we take them at their word, and this is basically what we're doing. We don't have the time to call the schools. We can't do it.
If there was a way to, like I said, use the NCCPA site, though, I think that would be helpful. I just don't know how that works.
We do use their site. We do to verify when they tell us that they're C certified. Then we will go in and verify that they are and print out that verification letter, because some of the letters they'll say, you know, they got their initial certification in 2008, but they're due to expire in December of this year.
Right.
So that's how we know if they've already expired and they said that they were certified, then we give them a fail and said, hey, you know, prove to us that you were certified at the time that you renewed.
Which they can do because you've already seen that, okay, this is a lot to do. And again, congrats for the three of you being able to do it.
And I don't know if it's open for discussion with regards to the letter and whether or not it has to be something that we collect a signature from, if it has to be a two-part step. I mean, through the journey of this process, it's been a lot to, there's been a lot to consider and a lot of reading and a lot of, you know, conversations. So it would be beneficial to move forward to have the process as precise as we can make it, so we're not wasting additional staff time to fix something that we should, you know, we have an opportunity now to make sure that moving forward the process is working correctly and we're not having to go back and change something I mean, everything needs to be changed at certain times. So we've spent a lot of time just getting the language on the letter to where we think it's understandable for the physician assistant, and we're not trying to make their lives difficult or cumbersome by this task, but it would just be helpful on our end if the letter's not necessary and we can just go ahead and go in like to the NCCPA's portal and check for compliance before we send the people out that we're not finding. I don't know what our options are, to be honest with you. Please. No, go, please.
I would just say, you know, I like the language on the letter. It says, you know, I was NCCPA certified at the time of renewal, that they're signing to say that when I renewed my license, I was compliant. If you go on today and check that they're compliant today, you don't know what they were at the time of renewal. So I think it's fine the way it is. I think it's pretty clearly written. It explains what you have to do and why. I think if you need more from us, tell us what you need us to do. I'm a little bit confused by what it is you're needing from us right now.
No, just if you know, I thought it was a two-part process with having to have the signature and then providing compliance. I thought this was a physician assistant's responsibility for the CME. I didn't know if there was room for adjusting it according to maybe us doing like.
Never sending
Yeah,
a
like-
letter out?
Yeah,
Oh,
what Gay is
checking the
suggesting.
NCCPA
Yeah.
beforehand to see if they're currently certified?
Correct, if what Gay is suggesting is even,
Well,
feasible.
Why I have a problem with that is because there have been times where people will say, they'll check the box that says, and send us CME certificates, and they are actually nationally certified. I don't understand why, but, so, those that don't get the letter, or they say, that they're certified and they're not, how do we know which one of those people to send the letter to and which not? If we go to the NCCPA website and look at them first and say, oh, this person was nationally certified since this date, we don't have to send them a letter.
Great. I mean, I don't
Yeah, that's what
understand why
I'm
you
not-
would send them a letter. It wastes your time, it wastes their time, it causes anxiety on their behalf. I mean, I think Gabe brought up a really important point. I don't know why we're sending letters to anyone we can
But
quickly check
that's-
online.
That's the point, is the letter, they originally signed their renewal document that says they were CME compliant at the time of renewal. If we send them a letter and they're NCCPA certified and we look that up, does the letter have to be signed that said, yes, I understand you're auditing me, and now I'm telling you a second time that I
No.
meet the CME.
I don't know why
Is-
it would need to
Is
be.
the audit required? Is there a second signature required because of the audit? That's what the question is.
What do the regulations say?
That's what I'm asking.
The reg says that you have to comply to an audit if selected.
The appropriate reg is 1399.617, and it says the board may audit a random sample of physician assistants who reported compliance, blah, blah, blah. Those physician assistants selected for the audit shall be required to document their compliance with the CME requirements of this article and shall be required to provide to the board those records retained pursuant to whatever, basically saying that you've complied, except that a physician assistant who complies with the CME requirements by being NCCPA certified do not need to provide the records if the board may obtain the records directly from the commission. So the reg reads that you need, we're gonna audit you, you need to respond, you don't have to provide it if we can look it up, but that person still needs to get the letter in the first place. I mean, this is the board's reg, so any amendments that you would like to make, obviously, that's up to the board, but I'm just letting you know what it says right now.
Can you read the last part of that again with the NCCPA?
Yes, says except that a physician assistant who complies with the CME requirements of certification by the NCCPA need not provide such records if the board may obtain the records directly from the commission.
Where does it say that the board must send the letter if they have already obtained these records?
It says those physician assistants selected for audit shall be required to document their compliance.
Right, so isn't the fact that they've been certified and it's online, isn't that documenting?
That's-
Right.
But
They-
it
they
takes
check that
action
box.
on the PA's part to document. Says
It says
PA
except, though.
selected
But
for
there's an
audit.
exception there.
There's an exception.
Except.
Right, except you don't have to,
Right.
Provide any documentation to us, you still have to provide.
I get your point. There is a gray area as to whether the letter needs to be sent out. And again, the board is more, obviously, I'm happy to assist in any way that I can. This can be amended if you want it to be more clear. Because the board hasn't been through the audit process before, this is still something that may, we maybe need to work the bugs out a little bit.
And I'm not legal, I just think it's already stated right there. It says, except if we're able to pull that information from NCCPA, it's a moot issue. Is that correct?
Well, that's only for providing documentation. That's not for saying I was certified at the time that I renewed. So we've read it as a two-part. That's why we created the letter to say, sign that you were compliant, and then if you're compliant,
Tell us how you're
tell us
compliant.
how you're compliant, and if you're certified with NCCPA, we'll go in and pull that up for you. But if you're not, you want to provide us with your 50 Category 1 CME. So we're reading the reg in two parts, that you're providing us with a letter that says, I am compliant, and this is how I was compliant. So that's what I was asking right now, is if we don't need to do a letter, it would be
PA is not
fantastic.
reported.
It would be so fantastic, and like Anita said, even those people that are NCCPA certified are going and digging through and finding certificates, 'cause they just
Absolutely.
don't understand. It does cause concern, causes you guys a
Absolutely.
ton of work.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Just-
I have a question. We're discussing a motion right now.
Right.
Now we've gone into a different reg. So
No,
is
it's
that
the
gonna
same reg.
require,
It's the same way.
is that
Yeah.
gonna require a different motion to amend that reg?
That's the same reg that we're amending.
That's the one we're
That's the
amending?
CME audit reg, yes, sir.
Okay.
So the way it applies is that the motion was to figure out what to do if there's no response. In this case, what we're talking about is whether or not they need to have any response, because if they check it ahead of time,
Yeah.
they don't really need to respond.
Right,
Of those 50 people, you now have 6 letters to send
instead of 45 or 50, yes.
yes.
But then are we relying on the NCCPA
To be current.
to audit a certain number of physician assistants
And
that
they
are
do.
certified by them?
I've been audited by
Okay, so
NCC.
what
And again, they
happened-
take that an extra
Okay,
step.
wait a second. What happens if the NCCPA audits them and they fail the audit? And we've waived the individual that we audited, and they flunked the NCCPA audit.
Well, their
So then
certification
we
will be
haven't done
pulled.
our due diligence. We
Wow.
let them off the hook because they were NCCPA certified, but they failed the NCCPA audit. We're never gonna know that.
Well, all but 1% are not gonna get audited, so I feel like you're kind of okay
I
there.
think we're waiving our audit requirement. We're giving it to another agency again. We have a regulation that says we have to audit a certain percentage
And you
of
will.
licensees. There's 2 ways they comply with it. I think the letter needs to go out. They send the letter back, signed, here's my certificates, or I'm NCCPA certified. That way we have something that they've signed, so if we find out 6 months later, the NCCPA audited them and they didn't comply, then we've got them with a piece of paper that they signed that said, I meet the requirements.
Did someone say NCCPA audits 1%? Did I hear that earlier?
Yeah, but 1% of 100,000 people is a significant number.
Question for our attorney about what we need to do moving forward. Like, could we make a motion around what we understand the intent of that to be, and that there's no, perhaps that there's no letter necessary to those whom we can look up, or do we actually need to rewrite the regulation? What do we need to do?
Well, if the board wants to change the way that that reg is written, then you can recommend that board staff come back with some language that the board can talk about at a future meeting, and then go from there. But I mean, because it's in regulation, the board can, finagle the language and figure it out what exactly the board wants it to say, and then we can just take next steps from there. It's just, it's a process. But yeah, absolutely, the board can change the language.
And you would recommend that beyond us saying we interpret the intent of this legislation to mean, or the regulation to mean X, Y, and Z? I think we should actually clarify it.
I would. I mean, in a perfect world, yes. I know doing a reg is a hassle, but from a legal perspective, it's better, yes.
I would be willing to make a motion, but I understand there's another motion on the table, so I will request that after this motion is complete, that I have the opportunity to make another motion.
So do you want to go ahead and vote on that first motion that happened and then move forward with any other motions?
Yes. Additional public comment? Please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Gloria Castro. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm Gloria Castro. I'm the Senior Assistant Attorney General for the Health Quality Enforcement Section. I'm agenda number 7, so I'll reserve more introductions on that. It is my shop that actually would have to enforce any citation and fine that Ms. Forsyth issues. And we would have to assess what the objections are by the licensee to your citation and fine. Among the things that we would want to see is such a letter, possibly signed under penalty of perjury yet again. On the renewals in Breeze, there is actually language, and Eliana B2 would be able to point that out to the board when you later on discuss it, if you wish, they've already put it on the record on a certain date that they are in compliance. I think that the point that your staff is trying to drive home here is that this is a second bite at the apple when they are caught in the audit, which is separate and apart from the renewal, that you as the board trust them to provide you with the information. So I would consider adding a declaration under penalty of perjury. Your DCA staff council would have to assess what it means if somebody is from out of state, whether they can declare under penalty of perjury under the laws of the state of California, even if they're out of state. That would require a little bit more research. I believe that, yes, we would like a certified letter in case they fight their citation and fine on the notice. You don't want to place your staff in the position where they're taking the word, because that's the whole point of the audit, is that we just want to make doubly sure for the benefit of the patients of the state of California. The NCCPA probably maintains a website for easy access for patients. However, do they make representations to you that what's contained therein is accurate and reliable? Probably not, because they can make a mistake too and not list someone who is NCCPA certified, and yet our staff here would take action to put them on an active status. So it works on both ends, that essentially if our staff were to defend Ms. Forsythe's issuance of citation and fine because a respondent doesn't want to pay it and does have issue with the notice, we would actually have to go get a certified copy. It would be a good idea to do that, or a certification of non-certification from that agency. So no matter what, the staff that you want them to do this important work, but the witnesses would have to be established through other evidence, certified mail, NCCPA records, et cetera.
Then can I ask you a question? Does that mean we should have a original signature, or can we take a fax or an email copy of the letter?
For most cases, the facsimile or a PDF would be appropriate under the evidence code.
Okay, thank you.
However, I will say that and thank you for asking me that question. Another reason why you would want to get a signature from your licensee is that many times these licensees are incredibly busy, delegate these things to staff with or without their knowledge, and the licensee's staff member may send this in and may fill it out on their behalf, sometimes wrong. And that has happened before, and we went through, not for this board, but for another one, that it does have auditing for SAMI. And we were not able to prevail on that citation and fine. They did bring in the staff member, and whether it was true or not, who knows, but they brought in the staff member that said, oh, I sent it in, and I signed his name, which was a little mind-boggling. But in any event, the ALJ decided that the citation and fine was not proper and that it was an honest mistake. And I'm sure it's something that would never happen again for that licensee. They will always respond to that board in the future because there was a lot of trouble, but the point was driven home. That concludes my comment.
So we should be collecting original signatures?
It's just a public comment at this
Okay.
point, and I, defer obviously to Mr. Sachs and the board and the staff to continue that discussion. But that's my comment on your motion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Additional public comment? Okay, we will call the vote. Dr. Alexander?
Aye.
Jennifer Calquist?
Aye.
Sonia Early?
Aye.
Xavier Escobar Acosta?
Aye.
Jed Grant?
Aye.
Catherine Hazelton?
Aye.
Xavier Martinez?
Aye.
Robert Sachs? Aye. Mary Valencia?
Aye.
Okay, so that motion carries.
And then Catherine had
Catherine, you
one.
mentioned you were going to introduce another motion?
Yeah, just a motion to, for us to consider at the next meeting, amendments to the regulations, that would allow staff to, I'm not sure exactly how to say this because I don't want to write the regulation in this, but changes to the regulations that that would allow compliance without staff sending a letter to those who already are certified. So I'm not saying, does that leave enough wiggle room there?
I think I understand what you're saying. So basically, you want to explore the possibility of having board staff go and check the NCCPA website for compliance for those people on the audit list, and then just not send them a letter if they don't need it. Is that what you're going for, or am I misunderstanding?
Yes, for us to have a discussion about whether
Okay.
we want to do that, and as such, it would be good to have some sample regulatory language that would enable that.
Okay.
Okay, do we have a second?
Could you, I just want to make sure, so you're directing board staff to come up with regulatory language to allow that, and then have
To
further
clarify,
discussion at the
right,
next
mhm.
meeting?
Yeah, right,
O-
correct.
Okay.
I second.
Further discussion? Okay, well, state my concern that we're passing off our audit responsibilities to the NCCPA again. We keep giving this agency more and more responsibility over PAs in California. Pretty soon we might as well just give them the whole PA board responsibility. They're a private entity, they're a corporation, and I think we should continue to do the audit, which we were accountable for at the last sunset hearing. They wanted to know why it had not been conducted. It's a big deal in the state legislature, and for us to say, okay, if they're certified by NCCPA, you don't need to be audited by us. I think we're giving too much wiggle room in that situation.
Do I understand correctly in that the point of this motion is to not require the signed letter from the licensee, right? So if the board staff checks this online and sees that they're NCCPA certified at the time they renewed, then they don't send a letter to the licensee and we just check the box that they were audited. Am I correct?
The point of the motion, it would not make that our practice. It would have us discuss it at the next meeting, whether we want to change the regulations to have that be our practice. So we're not making that rule change right now. I'm asking
Just
that we
talking about it.
bring it back so that we can take action on it, on changing the regulations at the next meeting, if we decide that that's the smart course forward.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
I have a
Further
question.
discussion?
So, do we have any data about how other PA boards in other states are doing these type of audits?
No, I don't. I can research that for the next meeting, for the next
I think that
CME
would be
discussion if
helpful
you'd like.
too, and if they're using also NCCPA or some other, or they're using different other ways to collect that type of information. And I was one of the lucky ones that I got the audit. So, and at the beginning it was kind of confusing, the first letter. I'm glad that in the new letter I think it's more clear, and but also I'm agree with some other comments about if we can do it or we can submit the letter either by email. I think I could have been answered faster if I couldn't use a scan and send the letter by email. It could be easier.
Yeah, I did take that off the new letter that says faxes and emails are not acceptable. We've taken that off, because if we can accept
Yes.
the renewal document as a fax, I don't know why we can't accept the audit letter as a fax or an email. So I've taken that off the new
Yeah,
letter so
because
that they
it
can,
takes a little
any
bit
way
of
you
extra
get it
step.
back to me, I'll take it.
I just want to, go ahead.
I just want to comment, when I've been audited by medical licensing places in different states, this audit occurs at the exact same time you're renewing. So it's not an independent audit like that happens randomly at some other time. So at that time, when you renew, you have to supply the documentation at that time. So I think you should consider doing that rather than doing it at a random time otherwise. That's duplicating the work. You would have a signature, just saying,
Yeah.
we'd have a signature, everything's current at the time of this, and you'd also be signifying your CME's current at the time of this. So you catch people that were, as you said, they say yes, but they weren't because there's 90 days. Anyway, just consider that's what other state organizations do for their audits. They don't do them randomly, they do them at the time of at the relicensure.
And since we have online renewal, we do have an option for attachments. So if we wanted to look at the regulation for our renewal and what is required, we could possibly say you're required to supply us CME compliance at that time.
If you're
And
selected.
if you,
Whatever you want.
instead of saying if you're selected, anybody when you renew, attach your CME certificates or a copy of your verification from the NCCPA at the time of renewal. I mean, the online system gives us an option for attachments, and something that we can discuss further if,
Yeah, that would be a future agenda item. I don't recommend that you guys discuss it today.
right.
No,
Okay.
I'm saying for the future
Oh, yeah.
discussion.
Is that something that you would want brought back at the next meeting? Instead of doing a CME audit, just do a CME compliance at the time of renewal? Yes, sir.
I like that idea. That's what I do on my license. At the time of renewal, I have to verify my continuing education.
I'm agree also about that. I think it could be better, easier, and less work for everybody, and we can just mail one letter instead of like 2 different type of letters.
But
Okay.
then
I know
excuse
we're
me.
gonna do this at the next meeting, so I know where the issues might be, but we'll,
Okay, so I need some clarification. So are we potentially discussing that at the time of renewal for everybody?
yes,
They
sir.
send in their certificates,
Or their,
and that's
proof
not
of
gonna create a
NCC.
tremendous workload for you guys getting
Oh, yes, it
2,000
is.
certificates?
Well,
Yes.
11,000, if you have 11,000 licensees and
We-
each has 10 or 11 certificates.
We average about 1,200 renewals every quarter.
And
I don't
remember,
think we
not
have-
everybody renews online right now.
No, but I know, but what I'm talking about is we average about 1,200 renewals, and some of them are paper, some of them go to the processing center at the Department of Consumer Affairs, some of them come into us, and some of them do it online. So you're looking at 1,200 renewals every quarter, and God
If-
knows how we're gonna track that.
If you do that way, you're essentially auditing everybody,
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
which I don't think
I
really,
think it's,
I mean, that's a huge burden.
I was not suggesting everybody, I was suggesting the way they do it in the state level is they randomly select people to audit, but it goes out at the exact same time as a renewal. So you're not, no,
that
no,
makes
no.
sen- oh, that
No,
makes
you're
sense.
still selecting randomly, yet it goes out at the same time as renewal, so you're not doing twice for any given individual.
That
No,
makes
it's still
more sense.
randomly, absolutely, that's crazy otherwise, you're right, sorry.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes.
well, I think currently with the audit coming, the availability of sending out the CME audit letters, we got notification not until October that they had been ready in May. So we actually generated May, June, July, August, September, October
All at one
out
time.
once and sent them out. So essentially, they are being selected the same month they're renewing because it's kind of triggering them. I mean, when you look at the dates that they're required to provide us with CME education, it falls within a 1 or 2 month window of them renewing their license because it allows them to be put in the pool. So I don't know if that's, a tight enough time frame to go ahead
They've
and
already
not.
renewed though.
Well, I know, I understand that. They've renewed, but triggering it at the same time, it's kind of, it should be working that way if we hadn't had to catch up with generating all of those months of letters. So generating the next month's letters in February, the dates will probably be from December or January renewals. Does that make sense?
So-
I don't know.
Yeah.
That still requires 2 different actions on their
Right.
at 2 different times.
And I can put a work order into the Breeze team to find out what it would entail to do the selection when we do the renewal. So the system generates a renewal document 90 days before they're due to renew. So it normally goes out on the 7th or the 8th of the month. So at that time, they could get a big star on their renewal documents that says, you are being CME audited. Please supply this information at the time of renewal. So that 5% that it's selecting, or that 1/12 of 5%, can actually be selected through their actual renewal notice instead of on the 15th of the month after they've already renewed.
That's the way it works for us.
Okay, so let me look into that, okay, and we'll bring it to the next discussion.
Okay, we have a motion on the board, on the floor, further discussion. Additional public comment? Okay, we'll call the roll. Dr. Alexander?
Aye.
Jennifer Calquist?
Aye.
Sonia Early?
Aye.
Xavier Escobar Acosta?
Aye.
Jed Grant?
Aye.
Catherine Hazelton?
Aye.
Xavier Martinez?
Aye.
Robert Sachs? Aye. Mary Valencia?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carried, so we will bring information back. Does that conclude the CME discussion?
One final thing, we heard from our colleague that we should change the notification on Breeze to say that they're certifying under penalty of perjury. Is that right? On the letter?
Yeah, it's already in Breeze.
It's already in Breeze. Okay, so on the letter. So is that something that we should be discussing now, or do we need another motion to include that, or just direct staff to include that in the letter for next time? In order to take that suggestion, what do we need to do?
I recommend that the board somebody make a motion and the board vote on it, and then direct staff to do it. That would be the motion, to direct staff to add penalty of perjury.
Okay.
For the signature on the letter.
I move that we direct staff to add penalty of perjury to the CME letter.
I second.
Discussion? Public comment? Okay, I'll call the roll. Dr. Alexander?
Aye.
Jennifer Calquest?
Aye.
Sonia Early?
Aye.
Javier Escobar Acosta?
Aye.
Jed Grant?
Aye.
Catherine Hazelton?
Aye.
Xavier Martinez?
Aye.
Robert Sachs, aye. Mary Valencia?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. We will add penalty of perjury. Okay. Does that conclude CME?
I hope.
Wait,
Thank
you don't want
you.
to talk about it some more? Come on.
Okay, I think we will take a 10-minute break, and when we will come back, we will do item number 7, presentation by the Attorney General's
So
office.
we used to have to do it.
Assistant board meeting back to order. We will now go to item number 7, which is presentation of Attorney General's office regarding cost, and that's by Gloria Castro, Senior Assistant Attorney General, and the board will sit out in the audience for this, please. Thank you.
Good morning. Gloria Castro, Senior Assistant Attorney General for the Health Quality Enforcement Section of the Attorney General's Office. It's my privilege and my honor to be able to be the prosecutor in charge of all the attorneys that are responsible for enforcement actions litigated on your behalf and on the patient's behalf against licensees. I wanted to thank Mr. Sachs for offering us the opportunity to come and speak to you today, and especially at a time where we have new leadership with Ms. Forsyth. We work very closely with Glenn Mitchell for many years, but have always known Anita and Lynn for all these years. So the purpose of today's conversation, because there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions, make any comments and suggestions to us, is I wanted to give you an overview of the section, tell you what we do for you, and how these issues get accomplished on your behalf. I've passed out a flow chart, and we will have an opportunity to go through that at the very end. The Health Quality Enforcement Section is in 5 different cities. We're in Los Angeles, San Diego, Fresno, Sacramento, and San Francisco. And it's comprised of very, very passionate people. This section was created in 1991, and we represent 100% health care state licensing agencies. So we have 10 clients, and you are among our clients that we're privileged and honored to represent. The legislature found it necessary to create this section in 1991, and at the time that the Medical Board of the State of California was represented by the Health Quality Enforcement Section, several client agencies that are healthcare related agencies came and sought our services as well, and you are one of those. We also represent 8 other clients, which include osteopaths, podiatrists, respiratory care therapists, physical therapists. We worked hand in glove with your agency and with all your public protection work. And we're vigilant on your behalf. This is our mission statement. And what is not here is something that I'm very proud of, and that is that our attorneys work as many hours as needed to get the job done. We're not 40 hours a week and then we go home. We like to win, we like to protect the public, and we'd like to exercise our discretion on your behalf thoughtfully. Where people can be rehabilitated, then that is what gets done. And where there is an inconsistency in both of those tensions, then we prosecute those actions to the fullest extent possible. We are only part of your overall enforcement timeline. As I heard earlier today during the board meeting, there is an appreciation that complaints come in to your complaint unit, and those are referred out for investigation, and there's an investigatory process of which we are sometimes involved in at your direction. But we're part of your overall timelines because we also are responsible for filing actions on your behalf, interfacing with the Office of Administrative Hearings and the licensees that you license and have chosen to prosecute. We take this very seriously. We are highly accountable to you on our timelines because any lack of efficiency does impact patient quality, patient health care quality in the state of California, and obviously, very importantly, the honor of your profession and the quality of the professionals that you license, which we take very, very highly into account. So this particular statute always bears very heavily on our mind when the public interest and the licensee's interests are incompatible. Our team is behind you in securing the balance necessary to achieve the right outcome. We take cases before, like I said, the Office of Administrative Hearings. They make recommendations to you after hearing. We also fashion stipulations and other outcomes. Before we get very deep into the enforcement process, I wanted to also point out other general legal services that Health Quality Enforcement Section does on your behalf. And it's it's like the other half from what you have DCA Legal Counsel do in the form of Ileana Butu, your staff counsel. We are available to assist your staff at every level that Ms. Forsyth and Anita want us to help. This includes evaluating, screening any complaints that are presenting special issues. We are available to train any staff in learning how to assess complaints that come in, especially in light of laws that may change, that may impact how the board sees these complaints. This includes a very, very robust training that we engage in with our partners at the Health Quality Investigation Unit. They too have been created especially out of the larger body of investigators at the Department of Consumer Affairs. The Health Quality Investigation Unit is an offshoot from when the medical board had investigators, but we actively have joint trainings that actually benefit you as a client agency. This includes subpoena enforcement, which is a very, very huge issue, especially in light of patient privacy concerns, and trying to make sure that at the subject interview level, when licensees come in to offer an explanation for their intents behind their healthcare decisions, that we get to the truth, and we try to get the most admissible and reliable evidence necessary to be able to figure out what happened, and most importantly, to be able to present to experts for their review quality evidence so that they can make a recommendation back to this client agency and this helps us decide whether or not we're going to prosecute. The other things that we do on your behalf is we represent you in civil cases, which are happening with more frequency. We do see our staff and our board members sued, and we represent you in all venues, federal, state. Oftentimes, if a licensee is unhappy or has an issue with the process that was engaged in during the enforcement phase, they will file a petition for writ of mandate. We represent you there as well as the board. Subpoena enforcements are also another heavily litigated area. Licensees are questioning this board's ability and other boards' abilities to obtain records, medical records from them. And we enforce those subpoenas and put the full force of a Superior Court order on our side to be able to get those records. Without records, we're DOA. There's nothing that can be investigated without records other than the word of the licensee, which is not a good documenting sort of fashion. We really need to see those contemporaneous records to highlight what the intent was at the time that the practitioner made those important healthcare decisions. We also participate in assisting the Department of Consumer Affairs in their enforcement academies. We provide guidance and advice there when asked to, and this aids in the quality of the investigations performed on your behalf by the Department of Consumer Affairs. We have liaisons and lead prosecutors. These prosecutors operate at the investigative and administrative phases. They monitor your statutes of limitations, try to figure out whether any cases need to be consolidated with other cases, identify dual licensees. This is all in an effort to make the work more efficient and more powerful. We consolidate complaints. Unfortunately, some people do have more than one complaint, and we try to assess who those people are so we can get the most outcome at a disciplinary phase. We provide quarterly reports to Ms. Forsyth on the aging of any matters in our office, and this includes investigations as well as administrative cases. We are very, very actively monitoring for interim suspension orders. These are the types of cases that are the highest urgency status. These are not routine cases. These are actually cases against physician assistants who are endangering the public. And we are always monitoring your cases in the investigative field to be able to identify that. We work closely with your staff when oftentimes mental health issues present themselves or self-prescribing issues. Staff has a lot of back and forth with licensees calling in, and we sometimes hear from our staff members saying, well, this person's sending me these emails, what do you think? We make assessments of that as well. Business and Professions Code Section 820 is the relevant statute, and we're seeing a lot more of those issues too, especially with self-prescribing. And we ensure that you, as the client, is being informed of the case status at every level. We enforce your chapter, which is Business and Professions Code Section 3500 EDSAC. We also monitor your licensees for violations of the Medical Practices Act and all of your regulations, and specifically concerning those with delegation of authority and proper delegation of duties to assisting physicians. Before I go into the flow chart, I wanted to cover essentially the various types of actions. And I know that this may be elementary, but at the risk of being repetitive, if there's any new board members, you might be seeing a lot of these terms being thrown around. But basically, statement of issues involves the determinations to deny physician assistance licenses. And this determination is made by your staff, your executive officer, and essentially you can choose to issue a license, free and clear, or not, and with probationary conditions. It's up to the licensee to request a hearing or agree with you that they need a probationary license. We are starting to see a lot of these coming through more and more, especially when you have a licensee that's asking you, well, they're not licensees yet, an applicant asking for a license from you, and they have suffered convictions and other substantially related crimes that you have to take into consideration before you give them a license. The determinations to refer a complaint to the investigative field, the Health Quality Investigation Unit, is made by the executive officer. And reported violations often initiate investigations. Some client agencies also self-generate complaints that they refer to the investigative field. Oftentimes, these can come in the way of a press release or a YouTube or any sort of thing that comes to anybody's attention can rise to the level of being something that this board should investigate. The outcomes, obviously, for the most part, are closures. They're fully investigated, and it's like a triangle, basically. You get lots of complaints, especially with the advent of Breeze. You are seeing a lot more public interest in their ability to file complaints, which staff has been on the receiving end of. There is a funneling process that creates referrals to the investigative field. You have about 100 active investigations right now out in Health Quality Investigation Unit from my last count. But of those, then fewer and fewer get referred to accusation level. This is after a full and robust expert review and a full inquiry into all the evidence available to us to make an informed decision. Your investigations can be vertically enforced upon request. The vertical enforcement statute, which is at Government Code Section 12529.5, marries a deputy attorney general with an investigator very early on in the investigative process. Dr. Bishop is intimately familiar with that statute, given that the medical board is required by the legislature to use this method to investigate physician complaints or complaints against physicians. The physician assistant board is not required to utilize this tool. However, they do request it in the most serious cases. These may include sex abuse cases, cases concerning high probability of harm to the public, but for the fact of a quick inquiry into what the physician assistant is up to, and mental health and self-prescribing issues. Here, this is where we are the most active on your behalf. We're independent. Obviously, the Attorney General is an independently elected officer who is primarily delegated the task of representing state agencies. Our prosecutorial discretion bears heavily on these cases. We make an assessment of the applicable burden of proof in these matters. Licenses are property. Therefore, in order to deny someone their property, a very, very high and substantial burden is placed on you as the licensing agency to take that property away. The case law has determined that it requires my office clear and convincing evidence to a reasonable certainty to take that property away or to curtail its use in any way by a probation order. And this prosecutorial discretion is something that we discuss with our executive officer very often. And as appropriate, we do have those discussions with her, and it's up to the board to sign any pleading that we send to you. And so oftentimes, this is after a lot of thoughtful inquiry and a balancing of all the available evidence, which ultimately relies on what the expert has advised us.
Ms. Castro?
Yes, sir.
May I ask, for my sake, perhaps others,
Uh-huh.
could you again let me know where clear and convincing fits in terms of other evidence that different types of action
Yes,
require?
yes. And I can backtrack here.
Like for other things, it's just preponderance or?
Yes.
Very different.
And thank you, Dr. Bishop. And for example, here at the statement of issue level, you have a house. Applicants seeking to be licensed are knocking at your door. They're not in the house yet. You get more rights when you get invited in. Those are the licensees. These are applicants aspiring to become licensees. They are subject to a much lower standard. Why? Because they haven't earned that property right. They don't have it yet. They want it, and it's up to you to deny it. And you do. And when you do, they can, I don't know, come back in several years, or go ahead and fight your decision, or accept something short of that. Sometimes you do offer them probationary licenses, and they take that. So that is why on a statement of issue level, the burden is a little lower. They don't have the property yet, so there's less of that concern. Now, for investigations, those are confidential. They don't have very many rights once we open up an investigation. They can't see what we have. They can't know what we're doing. They can get a little bit of information to know what it is generally that we're looking into. But at this level, we do bring them in with our law enforcement partners and ask them for more information. There is no right against self-incrimination. These are administrative actions. And even though it's about property, and sometimes, not very often, it will impinge if there's a parallel criminal proceeding, and we do see a lot of that, but that leaving those cases aside where you're looking at them administratively and they're also being criminally prosecuted and haven't testified, it is not too much of a give and take process. It's just a take. You are the licensing agency, and they have to provide you with the required information, and they are required to cooperate with you, in addition to all these other things that you impart upon them, like knowing where they are. They have to keep you apprised within 30 days of any change in their address. And so as Dr. Bishop pointed out, on an accusation matter, this needs to be proven by clear and convincing evidence to a reasonable certainty. My next slide gets at what Dr. Bishop mentioned, which is on a petition to revoke probation. So you've already given this person a chance to prove everyone right that they are exactly the type of person and licensee that you want representing your profession. On a petition to revoke probation, that is proven by a preponderance of the evidence. Preponderance means it's 51% versus 49%. Clear and convincing to a reasonable certainty is only one step below beyond a reasonable doubt. And the prosecutorial discretion aside, these are very, very tough calls when you decide not to pursue an accusation. And we have these discussions very often, and do look at expert reviewers and do look at the evidence. But on a probationary condition, especially if it's after a stipulation, okay? So that somebody has suffered the filing of a petition to revoke probation, they didn't submit their declarations, they didn't pay their costs, or worse yet, they have violated something that you specifically told them not to violate. You told them don't see female patients, and there you have it. They continue to see a female patient. That's very easy. It's either a yes or a no. And we file these petitions to revoke the probation, especially on a stip. They've agreed with you. You've adopted our recommendation that you stipulate with them to issue them probation to resolve an accusation. It's contractual, and it's preponderance of the evidence. We are no longer discussing whether we are touching the property right. You have given them the privilege to continue practicing with very, very specific instructions on what to do and, more importantly, what not to do. And that is why it's a little bit lower. Sometimes, as the board, you will see a combination accusation and petition to revoke probation. That simply means that not only are we presenting to you and to Ms. Forsyth for her consideration and signature that we want to revoke their probation, but on top of that, maybe there's a complaint that has arisen that had nothing to do with probation, and it's an accusation in its own right. So from time to time, you'll see a combination type of a pleading. And
I have a question.
yes.
Is this after the board has taken a vote, or is this prior to or in lieu of the board taking a vote where the EO is able to make that determination?
Oh, this is way ahead of before the board gets this case in front of them. This is all occurring between the HQE and your staff, with your direction, obviously illustrated in the disciplinary guidelines. We can assess different things from the probationary order, especially if it comes from a STIP. And the stipulations are crafted from your disciplinary guidelines. When matters go to hearing, this is at the Office of Administrative Hearings, we've had a full-on hearing, and the result is probation. The administrative law judge is required to look to your disciplinary guidelines, but sometimes we get something back that's a little bit more creative that we have to live with and interpret as needed. But no matter how this probationary order came to be, whether it's by agreement, via stipulation that you've adopted, and you will see our letters making recommendations to you as the board, that's where you decide, yes, we like this stip, no, go to hearing. That's where you will see it. But it doesn't even matter if it's by stip or by order, they're still on probation. And when we petition to revoke their probation, these are much easier calls because this person's already gotten the board's attention and the board's consideration of how the public interest weighs against the licensee's interest to continue practicing. And when we get to this level, as appropriate, we're always available to consult with our executive officer on making those important decisions. So I have passed out this sheet, and I know it's a little dark in here, but I've actually split a little bit of it. I wanted to give you an overview of the process for disciplinary actions before your board. And what you see up here is the top part of this flow chart, and I have some in the back if anybody needed to follow along. This flow chart is very simplistic, but it essentially describes what happens in a vertical enforcement scheme. But it follows the same route even if my staff is not involved in your investigation. A complaint is received, and complaints are nothing without the documentary evidence by way of medical records. We obtain medical records by two ways. The patient agrees to give us their records, and that's a release. The release is a very, very wide release. It allows the board to do any number of things within prescribed dates, and it allows the board to obtain the evidence necessary to make a full and complete assessment. If the release is received, the records are requested, and most of the time we receive our records and we can move on. However, if a release is not obtained from a patient, and we do search for patients far and wide to ensure that they know that this board is interested in their care, whether they know about it or not. Sometimes we're the first people that reach out to the patient and they had no idea that something had happened to them. Oftentimes it's via a review of a cures report. This is the control utilization. Well, it's basically, it tracks all prescription drug medication dispensed in the state of California. Oftentimes we reach out through patients that way after an expert has reviewed that cures report and says, look, this person's getting too much acetaminophen. This person's going to be on a liver transplant list in 4 years, and they're only 20 years old. Patients find out for the first time that that's how They don't know how we got their name, but they first hear from you. Other times, these are patients that have filed their complaint. And obviously, it's not going to be a surprise. They complain to you that their PA did X, Y, and Z. And they oftentimes sign this release right when they submit it to your staff here in their complaint unit. The records oftentimes are incomplete, and our staff or the investigators with their supervisors decide whether the records are complete. And sometimes we can go back and we're missing fetal monitoring strips, we're missing imaging studies. We work very hard to make sure we have all that evidence necessary to make a full assessment of what issues are being brought to the surface. If no records are released from a release by the patient, meaning we don't have the patient's permission explicitly to get their records, guess what? Because of your important mission, you still get those records. Why? Well, you're acting in the public interest, and even though you promise to maintain the privacy of those patients, which we always do, and we are the guardians of their privacy, nobody ever finds out their name, other than necessary parties, which include judges and lawyers. We go ahead and subpoena those records. We identify that we gave the patient notice, and we obtain the records from the practitioner and serve an SDT, which is a subpoena ducis tecum. If we receive the records, great, wonderful, we continue on with our investigation. However, we are seeing more and more records are not received for whatever reason. The main one being that practitioners either don't have them, and they're available to say, I don't have records, but that's actually very bad. And for whatever reason, we don't get records, and petitions to subpoena those records from them are filed with the Superior Court. We are an administrative process, and we actually need the teeth of the Superior Court to enforce your order. And what that means is we can compel them in Superior Court to produce those records. And if they don't, there are certain damages attached to that, including contempt and anything else that the board wants to do, which includes unprofessional conduct. They have to cooperate with you. But oftentimes they make you work a little harder to do so. And once we receive the records, the investigator or the primary DAG assigned to the case, if it's a vertical enforcement case, we will schedule a subject interview. The subject oftentimes comes in with an attorney, and they explain their thought process of why they took those patient care decisions. By that time, we have interviewed corollary witnesses, reviewed the records, and presented these to a medical consultant who sits in on those interviews oftentimes. If it's a conviction case, there are no records, they still have a subject interview. We want to find out why they were convicted, whether it's substantially related to the practice of physician assisting. Oftentimes these are moral turpitude types of things. You know, they stole something from Home Depot. That bears heavily on the license, whereas a jaywalking ticket might not so much. So all those assessments are made, and the subject is allowed to come in and say their side of the story. At that point, the transcript of that recorded interview is sent to the expert together with the evidence, and an expert oftentimes is a physician. Other times it's a physician assistant. It really depends on what is being called to bear, but we oftentimes obtain the services of an MD to review the care rendered. And we also take special pains to identify the proper type of expert to have reviewed this case. You really want to find a peer in their community who can attest as to whether or not the care rendered is within the realm of what you would expect from that practitioner in a similar situation.
Quick question?
Yes, come in.
I've noticed that in many of our recent discipline cases, there's no PA involved in this process. Are you aware off the top of your head when the last time a PA was involved in this process, or if there's any expert PA reviewers at all?
Off the top of my head right now, no, I can't think of that. But that doesn't mean anything. I could come back and report to you at a future date if you wanted me to do some analytics. I know we use physicians for the most part. However, there are situations where you would want to bring in a physician assistant. It just depends on the case. So I can't say that it's never happened. I would find that hard to believe. There are special cases where you might want to see a physician assistant expert.
I have a question. Didn't you just say that it's measured by a PA's peer? And if I'm not mistaken, an MD would not be a peer.
Well, because medical board physicians supervise physician assistants. It goes hand in glove. Physician assistants assist physicians, and those things are set forth in a delegation of authority. And the same standards that apply to the physicians are the ones that they're delegating down to the physician assistant. So it's not a higher standard, it's the same standard, but it's just a different person articulating it. I don't know if, does that make sense?
No. Because how can a physician say what a PA would or wouldn't do? They can testify what the standard of care medically for the patient is, which both parties are meeting. But how can they, having never been a PA, say what a PA would or wouldn't do in a given situation? And so I think there's an inherent unfairness or bias against the licensee under investigation if you don't ever have a PA involved in this process.
I agree.
We close a majority of these investigations with physicians reviewing these matters. But again, I think it just brings up the point that they're assisting a physician, and therefore they're operating within the delegation of authority given to them by a physician, which is consistent with whatever standard of care applies to the procedure. I know there are regs. You can't regulate everything, and that is the beauty of the standard of care, because you don't want to over-regulate certain aspects of professions, because the profession should be allowed to flourish and evolve into ways that allows the full research and full review and improvements in delivery of quality of care. But at the same time, the delegation of authority, and also they're supervised. All physician assistants, for the most part, are supervised. Oh, Dr. Bishop?
Just of interest to me, for nurse practitioners, what is the standard of their expert evaluations? Since many of them have to have a physician sign off on their practice, well, are physicians the ones who also evaluate their practice when this comes through?
I wouldn't be able to respond to that one specifically, but I can tell you that for midwives who are not free agents and have to have a physician that's agreed to take their patients, midwives are reviewed by physicians. Right. As a second expert, sometimes if it's a single patient case, as a second expert, you might want to look at something like that. Oftentimes, though, I will say that once we file the accusation, the defense will also proffer the expertise of a physician. I have done some of these cases, and it's been hard for me to recall having been confronted with an opposing expert who is a physician assistant. But I will say this, that having qualified and trained experts is a very, very arduous process. It requires constant refining, constant training, and convincing of people, in this case physicians, to offer their services almost pro bono. They get paid nothing, comparatively speaking, to defense experts who get put up in very nice hotels, and our folks are staying in state rate, they get it per diem. And the medical board oftentimes discusses this. I represent them as well as their attorney. And it would take a lot of work for staff to create a registry, create a program to train these folks. They're trained twice a year, right, Dr. Bishop?
I'm not sure. I think you must be
Yeah, I think our staff has to go out twice a year. They all get flown in. They go through a training and qualification process. They get put on a list, and it's very challenging even to find someone that'll take the case to review.
Do you know what the regulation or the stipulation states, and do they have a definition of peer?
No, and this is all quality of care. So basically, what we're looking at is Business and Professions Code Section 2234. This defines what negligence and gross negligence is. It also defines incompetence. There's nothing in there that says, oh, it has to be this person or that person. But essentially, how is negligence determined? That's the key heart of expert review. And it's a complaint filed with the board triggers an investigation. Patient records are reviewed by the board and may be subpoenaed. The licensee and witnesses are interviewed, and the interview is recorded. The evidence obtained then is provided to the expert, who will render an opinion as to whether the licensee violated the standard of care. The standard of care, is defined as the degree of care that a reasonable, prudent practitioner would provide under the same or similar circumstances. And I think that speaks to a point that was made. Negligence is defined by case law. And again, it doesn't define who, but it defines what. And gross negligence is the want of even scant care, while simple negligence is a lesser departure from the standard of care. Incompetence is different than negligence. Specifically, the term incompetency generally indicates an absence of qualification, ability, or function to perform a prescribed duty or function. So that means you never knew you didn't do it wrong today. You never knew how to do it, ever, and it's incompetent. And I think that's where it stands to bear that when we send things out for expert review, it's on those 3 different levels, or a no violation, right? So they're looking gross negligence, repeated negligence, simple negligence, incompetency, or no violation. And it really requires an examination of everything. And the delegation of authority is definitely the key document that you look at to determine, does this person go outside of those 4 corners? Are they in the realm of incompetency, or are they in the realm of having had a bad day that day, unfortunately?
I totally understand that,
Yeah.
but I guess going back to the initial statement in terms of who reviews, who's the expert, what is the definition of peer, I'm just wondering, is there some inherent bias when we're creating the people who are able to become experts or not?
From where I sit, I do not believe so, because my staff is trained to identify that, and we take great pains to read. But let me,
MD versus PA.
Right. Let me give you an example. If we get an expert opinion that is not sticking to the plan, which is just tell me if what they did on this day with this patient is consistent with what your community does for somebody walking in Visalia or wherever. Sometimes in those expert reviews, if they do stray and say, I don't believe this PA, or I don't believe this, that's a credibility determination. That's my job.
Right.
I'm the expert in that phase. Later on, it's the judges. But our staff, from a legal standpoint, we're the experts in deciding who's credible or not. This comes to bear most often in sexual abuse cases. And you'll see, an expert saying, I don't believe the patient. Well, okay, that is bias. Implicit bias is a huge conversation in my office. And so we've all been trained on it, and we're as prosecutors, as investigators, we're on top of that issue. So I appreciate that you're bringing it up, because that is an issue that would be ripe for possibly discussion even in the expert reviewer realm. But we identify it, and we will have these tough discussions with our clients, say, we need another expert, we have to toss this out. Those are the tough calls.
You folks all leave preface by saying I'm a strong supporter of PA. But I think the public perception when they see a PA is that this person is their physician. And I think for public protection and public perception, I think that since you've been delegated these privileges and responsibilities that a physician would take in that that you should come to that standard. For example, Mr. Sachs is an incredible surgical assistant, but I don't believe they'd have him doing the valve placement in that heart when they replace the valve, simply because he doesn't have that experience. He would not have that delegation of authority to do that, yet he certainly has a delegation of authority for everything else that he's an expert at. So I think that there isn't bias because physicians are delegating those things they feel that you are just as good as they are. That's my argument, that you should be better, you shouldn't be doing it at all. Like I wouldn't do neurosurgery because I can't do it at all.
And that would be incompetence.
Yeah.
So here's my issue with that.
Mhm.
The standard of care is the standard of care, but if I take care of a patient and they have a bad outcome, the first question that is asked is, why wasn't the physician taking care of the patient? Solely because of the letters behind my name as a PA. The care is the same. That is bias. That's exactly what it is. And so when you have an entire decision of whether or not to pursue a case based on the input of someone who has never walked in
Okay.
the shoes of the licensee, it just seems inherently unfair.
Well, here's something that we do take great pains in selecting experts. We do not select some random doctor that's never supervised a PA. We actually will have physicians on that list that work in those family practice units or work in those surgical scenarios where you are very physicians are very, very reliant upon the physician assistant. We have not, to my knowledge, hired any expert who had not walked that walk. So maybe I need to clarify that. They've all reviewed physician assistants.
So I've seen cases
Uh-huh.
come where there's an expert who is not in the same specialty as the person who is being accused and has never worked with a PA other than in the same hospital where other PAs work.
And that's an important consideration because.
Well, that's where
Right.
all this is coming from, because
Okay.
I think there is some inherent bias. And the case ultimately, after all of this money is spent, was unsuccessful on our part, and I think it could have been stopped in the very beginning at this stage if there had been a PA expert involved in the case.
And I can take that back to the staff and further discuss how we do that at that phase. But yes, we would pick a doctor who is working in a setting where physician assistants are part of the normal culture. And my staff does review all their resumes to ensure that they have had that experience. And so probably I can get that name of the case, I could study it, maybe report back, I don't know.
I think what his point is just going back to that, what, you need to have a PA, maybe not as an expert, but somewhere in the process to say, let's examine what a PA would have thought. Maybe they don't have to be the MD, expert. We don't have to change that process. But he's just saying, let's save some money because when it gets to us at the end, all that money's spent and it could have been saved.
Well, you are saving money now by utilizing the medical board's expert reviewer program. And you will be spending some money if you establish your own. But I'll move on. I think this is probably an agenda item anyway. And I'm very happy to be here today to explain a little bit of the process. But we do review those resumes, and we don't want that expert testimony subjugated by a defense expert coming in with someone who has a different take on it. And so after the expert report is received, if the expert identifies that we didn't ask the correct question, didn't get the correct evidence, very rarely we have a second subject interview or go back out and find more evidence. At that time, that's the trigger to accept it for prosecution, and if we do not, the investigation is closed. And if we accept it for prosecution under a VE scenario, it gets relayed to my office. On the left-hand side, you'll see that that is the flow chart. It's accepted for prosecution. The case has already been assigned to the DAG that is going to handle both phases, the investigatory and administrative phases. They have 30 days to send an initial pleading for Ms. Forsythe's consideration as to whether or not she'd like to sign it. And if the matter is not vertically enforced, this is a direct client referral, We look at whatever you have sent, together with the report of investigation and evidence collected without our input, and we make recommendations either to review it and we return it to the client to get more information for us, to allow us to be able to make that assessment of whether we can file a complaint or not. And expert review is key on that. Or we review and reject it for legal reasons. There might be some change in the law or something that prevents us from filing it. It's somewhat rare to reject a case, but it does happen. It happens less rarely if it's vertically enforced. We identified the problems with that case early on, and it never gets sent to our office for prosecution. And so this is the work of accusations. The pleading is sent to the client. Ms. Forsythe signs it. She serves it. And within 15 days, we are expecting to hear from the licensee. They have two choices. They could either fight their case or not. Sometimes at this level, we do obtain surrenders, which is good. It's an efficient outcome, and they can take a time out and come back to you as a petition for reinstatement. If we do not hear from them, and we're refining some things with DCA on this very topic, because default decisions are a very low-hanging fruit and something that we can avail ourselves of on your behalf. We prepare a default decision if we don't hear from the respondent, and we process that decision for Ms. Forsythe to consider, and she will enter a default decision. A lot of our executive officers are empowered on their own to go ahead and issue default decisions, and they don't have to come back to the board for consideration. If a notice of defense is received, that means this person does take issue with the accusation. And this is also available in a citation and fine context. They want to fight their ticket. That's a citation and fine. And here, they want to fight their accusation. The notice of defense is received. We exchange discovery. Oftentimes, this is where our staff is at the most disadvantage, because there is no requirement that the defense counsel give us anything that'll help you. Their role is to do something completely different than the prosecution. But we do have some discovery exchanges, and hopefully they will give us an expert report. They don't always do that, and sometimes they do that either at the hearing or at the very, very end if they're very committed to settling a case. We receive discovery in most cases, and when we don't, we file motions to compel in front of the Office of Administrative Hearings. When the notice of defense is received, we go ahead and request a set. This gives OAH the jurisdiction to hear your case. They don't have the final say because they send you proposed decisions on which you vote on a quarterly basis. So we give OAH the jurisdiction to set this matter for hearing. We receive those dates. And this last part right here, where either a hearing is held or a stipulation is sent, is where OAH and respondent, together with their attorneys, now have been involved now in this timeline. And that timeline can be as short or as long as the ALJ sees fit, for purposes of them availing themselves of all their due process rights, to be able to present whatever evidence they need to present to defend themselves. And you'll either get a stipulation sent to you for consideration, or we will hold a hearing. Very rarely, there are withdrawals after filing, but they happen. And dismissals sometimes do occur, although they can be exceedingly rare. And although frustrating, the outcome is what the outcome is, and it's the right outcome as long as you adopt it. And so this, in a nutshell, is the enforcement process. And I wanted to mention to this board that OAH is subject to file a report on their efficiencies and how quickly they turn around your hearings. At the same time, the Health Quality Enforcement Section will start filing reports with the legislature for every single client showing several performance-based metrics of interest to the legislature. They want to know how many of these did you do? How many cases did you reject and send back to the client for more investigation? How many withdrawals did you have? How many dismissals? Of the cases you sent back for investigation, how long did it take you to file the case? They want to know averages. So there's a great interest in the timelines, and that's what this is. It seems a little long, but justice sometimes takes its time to come to the proper resolution of the case. So yes, and then that concludes this, and now it's
Awesome.
yes.
Thank you so much.
No, thank
And,
you.
I have a quick question. If the board is subpoenaed, or if we're subpoenaed, do we get subpoenaed as a board, or do we get subpoenaed individually? I know some things go in with the EO and the president.
It depends. If you get subpoenaed to appear in front of a grand jury, that happens every once in a while. Some of your staff might have some information that somebody wants. That'll go directly to that person. And Lynn will call us, and we can find a PMK, a person most knowledgeable. Sometimes the person they think is the one that knows it doesn't. And oftentimes, Ms. Buchu is the one that's kind of running interference on that to defend you. And you can obviously step in at any time. But yeah, you could be, but it's all within the context of your official duties. It's not you personally, it's you as a board member. If you're the head of a panel, sometimes that's who they pick. Whoever signed that order is the person who receives that. And for the most part, we are able to dismiss you from these actions. But from time to time, especially if they're in federal court, it may take a little longer. The process in federal court is very, very pro litigant, and they almost help them sue, and that's fine. We just plug away and defend you as best as we can. But abuse of discretion, all those things are just, that's what she's here for, to make sure that you're not running outside of your comfort area, and she's a very important part of your process. Yes, very crucial. She makes sure you don't violate the Brown Act, make sure that all the motions are properly formulated, that you give notice, that you don't start early. We want to make sure it's an open process. So together with her, that's her job, is to make sure to avoid that. And sometimes it's unavoidable. Laws change, or some people just want somebody else to look at what it is that we're doing, and that's fine. My staff gets sued quite frequently for doing their job, and that's okay. And sometimes it means we did a really great job, but it's okay. It's scary though, but we're there for you. And also, we have a unit in our section. It's the torts unit. We also have a government law section. So whenever we get any case that actually impinges on more than what is readily apparent, like states' right. I know you have North Carolina on your agenda. All those big ticket items that are public policy in nature and not necessarily about this litigant, although this litigant may be pushing forward their case to represent a whole class of people equally affected prospectively, then those are the things that we work very closely with DCA counsel. And also we have a Solicitor General in our office who from time to time will take a case on behalf of our clients if it impinges not only that one client but a whole class of clients. And at the same time, we have an Attorney General opinion unit. This is available to you if there's a really thorny type of opinion that you want. You want to say, can a PA advertise on Groupon? I mean, those are the types of questions that sometimes boards want the answers to, and they get the answers, or a legislative change is made and the question no longer needs to be asked because it's been fixed for you by statute. Yes, sir.
No question. Looking at the charts and so forth, what is it costing us?
It's costing you have 6 months left in your fund as of December. So we're probably going to deplete your fund this year, but I do not believe we'll go over. I watch the bills every month like a hawk. Our SDAGs review the narratives that our staff does on your behalf. But if there's ever any issue with any case, please bring it to my attention. But I believe that the vertical enforcement process is not as expensive, given what the outcomes could be in the realm of interim suspension order, mental health evaluations, sex abuse cases. I think we get a lot of bang for our buck by 2 hours of an attorney looking at this. Because when the matter gets referred to our office, we don't want to reject it. We don't want to send it back for more investigation because there's somebody who is clearly should not practice. We'd like to avoid that and do when we can, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So it's a good process. Our budget also includes all the civil litigation things and subpoena enforcements and petitions for writ of mandate. So it's more than this enforcement, it's everything else. One thing I didn't mention is we oftentimes get public inquiry unit requests of the Attorney General's office trying to get at your records. Oftentimes they've already gone to Ms. Butu and asked the same exact question. That's when our staff calls up Lynn and say, hey, did you get this? And we want to make sure to be as helpful as possible to you. Same with Public Records Act requests, which have a very, very short time period. So those are the types of things that we charge the board for. But if there's ever any concerns on the bill, I want to assure you that I think we have very, very qualified staff, but if you're ever not happy with those services, we bill on an hourly rate. Unlike the investigators, they don't bill by the hour, we do. We're accountable to you, and if you don't like what it is that we're spending your money, and it's actually the public's money on, and you're not getting the efficiency or the quality that you expect, and those outcomes will occur where you did spend a lot of money and got nothing at the end, and that's part of the reality of due process and trying to flesh out these things that you wish you caught earlier, but sometimes it's not possible. But if it's a systemic change that you're looking for, then that's something that you should discuss as a board. Don't know if it'll give you the outcome that you're hoping for, but it's a good discussion for you to have among yourselves. That I don't have, you're my client, so we do what you want us to do.
I would like to have you have a PA review PA cases.
Me too, I'll second that.
That's what I would like. As your client, before you decide to proceed with a case, if it involves a PA, have another PA look at it before you go forward.
I'll leave that to the board to discuss more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will do that.
I'm sure I'll hear more about this Thursday or Friday,
Mhm.
but has there been any movement in getting more investigators that you're aware of?
Yes, I can.
Good news?
I think so.
Good.
I think that Health Quality Investigation Unit at last count had hired 12 non-sworn, and they're very good and very motivated, and it is helping with moving some of that work.
We haven't heard much about this at this level, but in my board all the time, that's the big ticket item
Yes.
that we just don't
Yes.
have the people who need to investigate these cases. So it slows everything down. So they've been working really hard to
Right.
get that going.
And they eliminated 2 of their clients, not you, but 2 other clients, and sent them to the other side of their shop. So that allows whatever staffing is there to continue. I would highly encourage the PA board to remain with Health Quality Investigation Unit. There are some advantages to doing that. Number 1, the expert reviewer program, but number 2, identifying either if a physician is in trouble for doing something and there's a PA involved, opening up a case on the PA or vice versa. We see a lot of unlicensed cases where PAs are running cosmetic type of settings without physician supervision. And we also see a lot of criminal cases that get prosecuted that require some organizing of resources, in the sense that you have the primary who's representing the medical board against that physician, also taking on the role of investigating the physician assistant for the same things. And you do want to identify those cases that can be consolidated so the truth can be ascertained, because once you have two people in the room pointing fingers, then that's how you find out who did what, when, and why, most importantly.
Is there a mechanism for having that second reviewer or PA around? Like, for example, in a PA case, and you have a physician that's expert reviewing for standard of care, is there any mechanism for a second review by the PA to see if there's any impact on that?
When we have a vertically enforced case, it's my DAGs that are saying, we need this reviewed by a second expert.
The DAG would have to decide that they want a PA to look at the case. It doesn't.
It wouldn't be that specific, it's just that we need another set of eyes on this case. And so we make those recommendations to the investigative field, and it's up to them to contact the client, because the client's the one paying these experts and approving 10, 12 hours, and it adds time to the overall thing, but that's a client decision. We make recommendations as to what it is that we believe this case may need. Within the time allotted, considering all things, because we could investigate a case for years and years, and that's not optimal, and it does occur. But yeah, it's a tension between, my first slide was excellence, professionalism, and public protection. You want a very high quality product, obviously. You also want to protect the public, and sometimes quality and efficiency, it's a balance, and that's where the professionalism comes in, and figure out, well, do we want to put the public on notice that this person has presented problems to this board? Then that's the pressure, is to go ahead and file the accusation once the prosecutor has decided that in their discretion there's enough evidence here. Most things close, like I say, but those are important decisions that are brought to bear. And while we represent the client in those decisions by presenting Ms. Forsyth with pleadings that we have drafted, sometimes we don't draft the pleadings because we don't have the evidence necessary, which you will never hear about. And it happens. I mean, she's smiling back there, but it happens, and these are very, very vigorous discussions that are upsetting at times, especially to investigators and to patients. And oftentimes those are the very folks that you hear from because they're complaining that you did nothing, and they filed a complaint. And they unfortunately don't know the full background of everything that we did to try and come to the result that they wanted, but that's where the discretion comes in. And that's why we are your attorneys, but we're independent, and we make those recommendations to you. It's very rare that we draft a pleading that is not signed, but that has happened too, where we feel very strongly this should be, not to this, level of, but we have those discussions. And sometimes the law changes too. We've drafted the pleading, and then all of a sudden, like, the chair gets taken out from under us, and a decision is made by this board. You're not going to reach back or claw back. It's an evolving process, just like medicine. The legislature has different focus things. Marijuana is going to figure very prominently in the next several years, especially in light of no standards being available for inebriation. Opiates, obviously a huge issue, nationwide epidemic, but we're always trying to stay ahead of that. And patient privacy, very huge. We're making law in every level on that, because patients have an interest in knowing why it is that the government wants to look at their records and for what purposes. So I'm very, very honored to have you as a client. We're very, very committed to representing you as best as we can within the time and resources available. And I thank Mr. Sachs very much for inviting me and for taking the time to listen to this presentation, which may have been redundant. I hope not. I hope it's a good refresher. If there's ever anything that you want this agency to come and present to you in terms of suspension orders, or you don't understand what an 820 is, or why are these STIPs looking this way, those can be background conversations with your staff, or they can be public in nature like this. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question.
issue, but is there a mechanism in place to advocate for your department to have PAs kind of ready? I know that they use physicians for the review, but to have, interview PAs and get them ready to be considered as expert reviewers, and if so, how would that mechanism look for advocacy?
Well, I appreciate that comment because it allows me another opportunity to explain this concept. The board itself, the staff here, would have to create that program of a list of experts. We would very strenuously recommend that the list of experts not just be any expert that wants to do it as a physician assistant, someone who's qualified, someone who has the resume to do it, the interest in knowing that they're not going to pay very much and it's pretty much pro bono work, and that they're properly trained on how to draft reports, which we've seen a lot of work done on that with the medical board, and they're doctors, they're not authors. They're physician assistants, they're very perfunctory in drafting, but an expert report is a whole different art. I don't know if it's an art, but you have to express yourself contemporaneous with everything you reviewed, and that takes a lot of training. So it would not be my decision. And like I said, this board is benefited greatly by the fact that the board already invented the wheel, and you do use those experts off of that list. The enforcement committee of the medical board meets every quarter, and I can't remember the last time that we haven't discussed the quality of expert review. It's something you have to keep going back to over and over. And it can be done. All the clients that we have expert panels, but it's really filing a will of this board. And that's a decision that's not up to me. I personally like having the doctors review these, but that's just a personal preference, which I can understand is inconsistent with a perceived bias of doctors.
Well, this is also one of the agenda items today. Something related to your question is on the agenda for today, so you can certainly bring up your public comment again. So the board can discuss it, yeah.
I just a quick question, why do you personally prefer physicians?
Because we already have the expert reviewer program in place. And I think to start it from scratch would probably involve a lot of work that might delay cases at this juncture. That's just my preference, is it's already there. But to plan for that, we have cases in the hopper ready to go to expert. Do we, the standard of care is the standard of care, and it's not up to us, it's up to those experts. And that's how we've done things this whole time. And I've been at my job about 4 years in March, been with the section for 10 or more, lost count, I'm having too much fun. But yeah, we've always used doctors to review these cases. But we do use doctors to review other cases like midwives and hire experts that involve the lower practicing professions in a symbiotic relationship such as this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Appreciate you coming all the way up from Los Angeles.
Yeah, I got a motion ready. A motion in the holster. Motion in the holster. Unless we're breaking for lunch, because it's.
Yes, I think I know how to do that.
Can you push the screen up for us, please?
Oh, that was me. Aren't you? You're dancing for me,
Oh my God. All I can see is, and keep Landmark does our investigation.
Yeah, I don't have any, that,
I know what you're trying to go, and I will talk to Karen.
well,
I'll see if it's. On that side?
Okay, so we will resume, and we're going to go out of order a little bit. I'd like to have the presentation by Department of Consumer Affairs internal audit process. Brett Heintz, if you could come forward and give us some information on what's going on. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Brent Hintz. I'm the internal audit supervisor for the Department of Consumer Affairs. And I'm here to talk in a general way, excuse me, about the audit process. And I would like to begin by making a distinction between internal auditors and external auditors. So as an internal auditor, we work for the department, and so we are an in-house audit organization that audits the different entities within the department. And I would like to just make a distinction with the Bureau of State Audits, which is an external entity that may come in and do audits as well. Our focus mainly is doing operational audits, which is to say reviewing the operations of the entity that we're auditing. And I would also like to state that we're a pretty small office. We have an audit chief who would normally make these presentations. And then I am the supervisor. I do the day-to-day supervising of the auditors. We have a staff of 5 auditors at this time, 3 of which are full-time auditors, and 2 are retired annuitants, so they work part-time. And we also use professional standards in our work so that our work is reviewed by other organizations to verify that we are using the standards. And to go into basically how an audit is initiated, the boards and bureaus are chosen for audit based upon risk. And those risks are the length of time since the last audit, identified risks from the State Leadership Accountability Act, and from management input. So that's how you or anyone else becomes what we would call an auditee. Once an audit is assigned to an auditor, the audit chief notifies the board or the bureau by sending an engagement letter, which notifies the board or bureau that an internal audit office audit is going to be initiated. And concurrent with that is the preliminary work. So the auditor will get some background information. We'll look at your website. We'll do other searches to get information about the entity, because we are not familiar with the board or bureau, so we want to become familiar to be able to do our audit in an effective way. Are there any questions at this point? That's kind of how we get to the point where an entity is audited.
Could I just ask, when was our last audit? Or have
No,
we ever had one?
I can't remember exactly what it was, but I would say probably like 7 to 10 years ago. Yeah.
Just one question. You
Sure.
might have said it and I missed it, and if so, I apologize in advance. But what is the purpose of the audit?
So the audit is mainly to look at all the operations and make sure that they're working effectively. And we can't look at every single thing, so that's why we do a risk analysis to determine what's important and what needs to be looked at. And some of the things that we look at, like I said, the last time you've had an audit, any risks that are already identified. Management may have some issues that they may be concerned about that would factor into what we're going to look at. But I would say, you know, licensing, enforcement, those are areas that are going to be looked at.
Okay, but the purpose is to ensure compliance with the law, or to maximize efficiency, or to reduce duplication, or what is the main
Yeah, I would say
purpose?
both of those areas. hmm So if we were only looking to see if you complied with the law, we would call that a compliance audit. But operational audit's a little more broad, a little more general. So yes, we would look at efficiency as well. Yes.
I have a
Yes, sir.
question. The last time was 7 or 10 years then. Is there a audit cycle for boards? Is it every 5 years? Or is there, you know, what's...
That's a great question. And I wish that we had the staff to say we're going to have an audit cycle. We don't. So if we did a 3-year audit cycle, we would not be coming back in 3 years and doing another audit because we just do not have the personnel to do that. So it's more like a 7 to 10 year process, you know, that's kind of where we're at right now with the staff that we have.
And how do you choose the people that you audit? Is it random? Is it computerized? Is it?
No, it's not random or computerized. It's all based upon risk. So like I said, one of the three factors, the three main factors are how long has it been since your last audit, the risks, and that could come from a variety of sources, but mainly it comes from the State Leadership Accountability Act, and then management input. So executive management may have some input. They may have some information that we don't, so they may have some areas where they feel that there's some risk. So those are the three main, areas that we.
I guess I'm kind of wondering how do we come up on your desk, or how do who's the next person, or how is it generated that a person gets? I know you gave me the three, but
yeah.
How do we know who's next, or how do we get on your desk at this time in 7 years as opposed to 10 or 15 years or 3 years?
That's a process that I'm not a part of, but it's a process that includes the audit chief, and then there's an audit committee that has individuals that are in the executive suite that are on that committee. And so they get together and they talk about the risks and how long it's been since your last audit. So that's kind of a group committee decision about, okay, we're going to try to tackle these audits within the next 2 years. We try to do a 2-year plan.
Okay.
And we try to stick with that plan, although there are things that come up
Right.
that are unplanned that we have to do. We end up doing audits that are not a part of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
What is done with the results of the audit? What happens when the audit is complete?
Actually, if you don't mind, if I could continue,
Oh, I'm
and I
sorry.
will have, no, that's fine, because that's really the main part of my discussion from this point on is how we get to the conclusion.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no, that's right. Thank you. So to continue on, we have that management meeting between the audit staff and the management of the entity that we're going to audit. And we may have questions at that point, at that initial meeting, and the audit team may have questions of us as well. And after that meeting, then the auditor or auditors that are going to be a part of the project will meet and discuss the risks, and there may be some individual risks that are discovered during the audit that we'll try to address. Audit management or the auditee may have some risks that they want to share with us, so we would include those in our specific audit plan for the entity that we're auditing. And then we'll develop steps to meet our objectives of the audit, including requirements of law or regulation. And then at that point, the auditor will gather information. They'll do the actual audit work. They'll go to the entity. They will share the office. They will look at documents. And generally what they'll do is they'll pick a sample, random sample, and they'll look at those documents to try to meet the objectives that they've established. And what they should be doing is if they identify any issues, they should be going to management immediately and discussing that with management. So you will have a verbal exchange with the auditor if they find anything. Now, once the audit is complete, the auditor assembles all the documentation and the draft report for review by the internal audit management. And once that review has taken place, the auditor will schedule a meeting with management, and they would discuss all the issues again. That we call that an exit conference. And the draft report at that time will be presented to management. And then management will have a set time to respond to the report with corrective action plans. So, for an example, if we find that that the auditee does not have policies and procedures, then we would have that as part, we would call that a finding and have that part of the audit report. And then the corrective action plan that we would expect from the audited entity would be, we agree that there's no policies and procedures, and we will have policies and procedures written by May 30th. And then that would be included in the audit report. So the corrective action plan is an attachment to the audit report. So once those corrective action plans have been reviewed by the audit office, they're included in the audit report, and then that's called our final audit report. So at that point in time, it's a public document. It's available to anybody who wants a copy of it at that point. 6 months after the issuance of the audit report, our audit office will come back to the audited entity, and we will review the progress on the corrective action plans. So there may be no policies and procedures, but when we come back in 6 months, you may have policies and procedures for licensing, but not for enforcement. So we would state that in our 6-month report. We would say, you know, partial progress has been established at this point. Now, if policies and procedures have been written and everything's complete, at that 6-month point, that's the end. That's the end of our involvement. But if there's anything hanging out there that's not been addressed, fully addressed, if you have 3 audit findings and there's still 1 left over at 6 months, then we'll come back a year after the audit report, and then we'll address that issue. If that issue has been addressed, then we'll state that in the interim report. And if it has not, we will state that. But that's the end at that 12-month point. Past the audit report date, we're done. So that's basically in the nutshell how it works. Yes?
Within the 6 months, if there's a question that the board, you know, wants to ask, are you guys available for comment or?
Sure. Sure. And if you want to, let's say you have a corrective action plan and you want to run it by us before you send it to us and have it included in the report, you know, we're happy to look it over. We might have some comments. I can tell you the last corrective action plan didn't have target dates. And so, you know, we had to send that back to have that included. So, you know, I think it's a very interactive process. The auditor is going to be very helpful to the process, and it's not a confrontational experience, in my opinion. We try to work together as well as we can. And I will say, you know, a part of the audit report is going to be recommendations for each finding that we have. So if we go back to the policies and procedures, you know, our recommendation will be to write policies and procedures. If you have cash, we'll recommend, and it's a finding, we'll recommend that you have proper procedures over that cash, things like that. So we'll have recommendations, but we can't write your policies and procedures, or we can't do that part. But we're very willing to work with you. We want to make this a good experience. We're less interested in the findings than we are in the fix.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else?
Any other questions from the board? Public comment? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on in the agenda to item number 11. Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Update, and this will be presented by Jonathan Burke today, who's representing Christine Lally.
Good morning, President Sachs and members. Happy New Year. My name is John Burke, and I'm a manager with DCA's Board and Bureau Relations team. It is great to see everyone, and I thank you for the opportunity to update you on the activities of DCA since your last meeting on October the 14th. On January the 10th, Governor Brown released his proposed 2017-18 budget. Tomorrow, January 24th at 10 a.m., Governor Brown will deliver his State of the State address. If you would like to tune in, the State of the State address will be available via live webcast at the California Channel's website. Information on the Governor's budget and State of the State address was emailed to all DCA board members. On January the 13th, Governor Brown appointed Jolie Onodera as the Deputy Secretary of Legislation at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Onodera served as the Principal Consultant for the Senate Committee on Appropriations. As we begin a new legislative session, several DCA boards are scheduled for sunset review hearings on February the 27th and March the 6th. The Medical Board sunset hearing is scheduled for February 27th. As you know, the Physician Assistant Board underwent a successful sunset review last year. On October the 27th, the department hosted its annual distributed costs review and open house for executive officers, bureau chiefs, and board presidents. This meeting provided an overview of the department's budgeting process and how costs are distributed, pro rata, to all boards and bureaus. Following presentations, attendees were able to visit with staff from each of the department's individual units to learn more about the services provided by the department, as well as have access to the individuals running these units. And we'd like to thank EO Forsyth for attending that. Update on Breeze. EO Forsyth updated you earlier this morning on Breeze and QBERT. In 2016, DCA deployed over 1,500 requests for system changes to Breeze. The Breeze team, DCA's Office of Information Services, and the vendor recently completed a software release on January the 11th. The next Breeze software update is scheduled for February the 15th. The Physician Assistant Board has 4 pending change requests, which will be resolved in a future software update. Since January 2016, 9 change requests have been completed, with 1 additional system change scheduled to be included in the February updates. As we kick off a new year, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind board members of required trainings. An email was sent to all board members on December the 29th, 2016, which included details on training frequency and registration. Note on board member orientation training. Board members are required to complete board member orientation training within 1 year of their appointment and reappointment to the board. This one-day training will be held 4 days in Sacramento this year on March 21st, June 20th, September 27th, and November the 15th. Board members are also required to complete online ethics, sexual harassment prevention, and defensive driver trainings. Please note, 2017 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention year for the Department of Consumer Affairs. All employees and board members are required to complete this online training in 2017, even if it was completed last year. Please contact Board and Bureau Relations if you have any questions regarding required trainings or need assistance. And finally, the department's annual report is now available on the website, on DCA's website. In it, each program, including the Physician Assistant Board, notes its major accomplishments for the 2015-16 fiscal year, as well as new laws or regulations. It also includes licensing and enforcement summaries, staff information, and more. This concludes my update from DCA. Thank you for the opportunity. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Questions, members?
I just have one. Why is it that our sexual harassment training is maybe asynchronous with the mandatory years? Why wouldn't, are we required to do it every 2 years and also every 2 years is a mandatory year? Or how does that work?
I believe every odd year is a mandatory year, so 15, 17.
So, and we're required also to do it every 2 years? Is that right? Or are we required to do it every year?
It would be every mandatory year, I believe. I can find out exactly what it is. I don't want to shoot from the hip, but all I know is 2017 is a mandatory year, so it would have to be done this year to be in compliance. And then as to the frequency beyond that, I can get back to you.
Okay.
I think that if, for example, you started in an even year, you do need to take the sexual harassment training that year. So basically, there would only be really one time that you would need to take it 2 subsequent years in a row, just because of when you start.
And then you stay on track.
And then you stay on track,
Thank you.
Because I had to do that, and it was annoying.
Okay, thanks.
Very clear on my sexual harassment responsibilities. Well, you know what I mean. Yes. I'm being good, you know.
Any other board member questions? Public comment? Thank you, Jonathan. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know everybody's getting hungry, but while I still have Gloria Castro here, I would very much like to move to agenda item number 8, since it came up during her presentation, discussion and possible action regarding using physician assistants to conduct initial review of complaints. So, Jed?
Thank you. So my concern here is that there is some sort of inherent bias, or maybe inherent bias against our licensees when there is potential discipline. I think it's difficult for someone who has never been a PA to understand the complexities of PA practice, where there may be different physicians with different ways of doing things, and the nature of our job is that we have to sort of do things the way the physician does sometimes. And that becomes problematic when you're having someone review a case, because there's many right ways to do things in medicine. And just because the person, the licensee, who is the subject of the complaint or action, didn't do things the way the expert reviewer did, doesn't mean that he or she was necessarily wrong. And I think having a PA who sort of walked in those shoes and done those things, who works in a similar field as the person who's the subject of the complaint, gives a much better viewpoint of whether or not there was wrongdoing and whether or not there's a need to protect the public from this particular person. So with that being said, and from what we just learned from the presentation, which was excellent to understand the process, my understanding is that this case review does not come from the Attorney General. It comes from, in our case, the medical board, because the medical board does our complaints and disciplinary stuff. Yes. So what I am sort of needing to know is, would the medical board be able to have some PA reviewers, or is that something that the PA board has to provide? Or how would we get a PA in this, to use this, what Ms. Castro said was a simplified flow chart, which is, I hate to see a complex one, because this is pretty bad. But how do we get a PA to review the case before it's accepted for prosecution? How do we go about doing that? Is that something that our board has to do? Could the medical board do that? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-on expert big report. I just would like for them to review the case somewhere along the way and say, I think this is a righteous complaint, or I think that, this PA was perhaps in a compromising situation due to the nature of PA practice.
What we can do is check with the medical board. I'm not sure if they have any current PAs on the list as consultants. We can definitely check with them. If not, we can find out how we would go about recruiting, because we would have to recruit some first, and then get them trained in order to do the medical board's job. That's definitely something we can look into.
Didn't we used to have a couple of PA reviewers?
I don't know. I really don't know if we did or not. I don't know.
Maybe I could ask Ms. Castro if this is the case. It's my understanding that many of the local medical board offices have an on-site medical board expert who acts as an apportioning valve, as a check. So sometimes it never gets past that. It never goes to the further expert evaluator status. So is that indeed correct?
That is indeed correct.
So that would be one way for a PA to intervene. If they were a PA expert would be available. If there are local offices that involving a PA, they could perhaps do at least a paper review and see if it. I'm just again brainstorming again. I realize everything costs money and this and that slows things. I'm just saying that would be one possibility if it's deemed that would be a thing to do. It'd be one check to do before it gets to the full-blown investigation with other experts. But
right, and just to build upon that, what I discussed for the most part and during my presentation was the expert review process after 2 other sniff tests, which is what we call them. There's first one with board staff at the complaint unit, and that's where the inverted pyramid that we talked about, that's where you have a massive amount of complaints, and some of them, they have the wrong person, you refer it out, you close it. Any number of things can happen at that point. But yes, a consultant does review it at that point. And the only determination they're making is no violation, refer for investigation. So they're identifying there's smoke here. Let's figure out some more things. And Dr. Bishop, yes, you're correct. Once it reaches HQIU, the Health Quality Investigation Unit, whether it's vertical enforcement or not, it doesn't matter. Another consultant at that juncture reviews the case, sometimes now with more records, sometimes now with a little bit more workup by investigators. This may include interviewing percipient witnesses, interviewing the patient, and then they will look at the case at that point and make a decision as to whether or not we move on to subject interview. At subject interview, sometimes then we again have this discussion with whoever sat in on the subject interview, because that consultant sits in during subject interviews, unless it's a conviction case and it's just you don't need an expert, but sometimes even on the sex cases, was this part of a bona fide medical exam or not, or is this just hanky-panky? You need a medical consultant to cut through that stuff, even at the subject interview. So I would even submit that that's another time where an expert is reviewing that. And then and only then is it sent out for an expert review. That is selected from a list that we take pains to figure out what types of evidence will we send this expert to review. We don't want to bias the expert at that point, and we actually redact things. For example, if we get a complaint and the patient got a massive amount of money or no money, it doesn't even matter. We knock out the money. Because sometimes experts say, this doctor's been punished enough, they got $1.5 million judgment, or they're very outraged by the fact that it's a very, very low bill. We just take that out of the expert's realm just to prevent that bias that may or may not occur. But they're human beings, they're not robots, and they're going to take into account what they need to take into account. But credibility issues and workload realities are not the standard of care. But it bears into what your concerns are, that you want to prevent the bias rather than, include it by bringing in a very, very high level of expertise. I will say this, that what I would anticipate could occur if we do hire PAs to only be the exclusive reviewers of your cases.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's not what I'm suggesting.
But I wanted to make sure that, to put this on the table, because what does happen at the Office of Administrative Hearings is we get one expert for the most part because we have very few resources, and we just go with our one expert. And sometimes it's a multiple patient case. Those are easier because it's not the one patient that it's a handful of them. But on single patient cases, it gets very challenging because at the Office of Administrative Hearing level, the judges will allow respondents to bring in an expert for every subject and for every patient. Our staff sometimes is going against 5 experts, much to our chagrin and much over our objection, but this is due process. They will allow in every single expert. I will submit that if our case was reviewed by a PA and a doctor, then we would be in a better position than if it was a PA alone, because all it would take would be a defense expert who is an MD to come in and say, nope, the PA is wrong. I don't know what a judge would do with that, but it is a battle of the experts, flat out. It's a fight, and that's why we love what we do, and it's just to get to the truth. But I know I wasn't asked that particular question, but I would anticipate that you just kind of would bring in another expert for the ALJ to consider what the standard of care
I don't think
is.
that's really what we're talking about.
No, I
though.
know.
I think we want to go like lower level, just have a brief set of eyes on it and say how
That
much
makes sense.
energy should we really put forward, considering
So
our perspective.
do you want it at the initial complaint level when we first get the complaint?
Somewhere,
CCU?
probably somewhere after the sniff test that she was talking about, where it has some validity. Maybe, someone could just take a quick look at it that's a PA and kind of weigh in, not anything really official, but just to kind of give an opinion. And it
Okay,
wouldn't
so
have to
at
be
the
part of the
initial-
record, but just another part of the sniff test, so to speak.
Okay, so the initial complaint, you would like to see a PA take a look at that maybe prior to us sending it to the field for further investigation.
What do you think, Jed?
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Before
Okay.
it gets to the Attorney General's office, right? Somewhere between you and the Attorney General, which pretty much means it's at the medical board, right?
Right.
It would be nice not to exclude the physician evaluation. I don't have any problem with a physician looking at it. My issue is that there's no PA in the process anywhere, and that is a huge opportunity for bias, even unconscious bias, just because the letters behind our name are different. And I would be interested in just the licensees on the board here to be able to raise their hand when they've experienced that. I would bet that every hand goes up. And so I want an opportunity when we're doing this to make sure that we are being as fair as possible to all parties. So I would like a PA in there somewhere just to look at it with the physician.
One thing I will say that this would do is it would provide a good framework to move forward on the investigation. So if part of that assessment, especially on the cases that are going to move forward, is from the PA's perspective, these are the questions, these are the types of documents that should be sought, this is the reality that this person lives in that scheme of family practice or whatever the specialty is, that would be the most useful and helpful aspect of that, because it would give more than a sniff test, but it would give more guidance and direction, which is what we always try to achieve. We don't want to shoot in the dark. We don't want our investigators not knowing where to look, and it may provide that texture that you feel you need in these very important cases to get the PA's perspective on that. Not the credibility, but just on the reality of what the standard of care means and what is delegated, what is delegatable, and what should not ever be delegated, even though maybe this physician did delegate it. And you work for this doctor, and there's things that happen.
I think it would likewise be helpful to see if there's concordance between the physician and the PA who are reviewing the case. And if there's discordance, why is that? And maybe there is not, this is not something that should be pursued. I think even though there may be a bit of an initial upfront cost, I think there's also a downstream savings where there may be cases that don't make it all the way through because we identify that discordance early and where there may be an issue.
And on that point in particular, especially on single patient cases where you're asking two different set of eyes on a single patient case. And again, it doesn't really occur when you have a multiple patient case or repeated negligent acts. We oftentimes, if we have two experts and they're kind of like not really meshing, then we still have an opportunity to go back, and without without identifying the source, say, what do you think of this? And you're really actually getting it from this other opinion, and sometimes you do end up getting to the truth. It's I didn't even think of that anaphylactic reaction that is a side effect, and I didn't read the physician desk reference, and lo and behold, there it is. It's a red box warning, and oopsie, then it's a reasonably foreseeable consequence of this treatment, and you look back to the risks and benefits and consent, but those things occur. You don't hear about them, but they occur where we're bouncing two different things off. Sometimes the subject interview also illustrates other things, but that's a very late. You're talking about kind of cutting it off before it gets very far.
Right. So, do you need a motion?
No.
No? Do we?
Do I need a motion to?
Better.
Okay.
Okay.
Anytime you want somebody to do something, board as a whole should
Should
basically
vote on it?
do it.
So I'll introduce a motion to.
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is this directed to Ms. Castro?
Sorry.
Is this person, that person be considered a quote expert witness?
They will
And
be.
if it is, what's the process and length of time to become an expert witness?
Anyone who sees anything at any time in the investigation, other than the DAGs who are directing it, are identified in the report of investigation. So if we showed things to the PA and they reviewed it and they had something to say, this will be documented in an investigative report. How the defense may see that person, whether they're the testifying expert or reviewing expert, that's all fair game. So even the medical consultant who is doing the sniff test, while we will not call them as witnesses, they are on a witness list, they are material and relevant to the investigation, and it would be up to the defense to decide, well, I'm going to call that guy. Depending on where the investigation is, though, later on in the process, there's more information. Very early on, there's less information. So the value of that opinion is highly dependent on what information was available at that time. We would suggest that as time moves forward and more evidence is obtained, including the subject interview, which is a crucial component of getting the intent and the mindset contemporaneous with the treatment, even if their opinions are inconsistent, they're not necessarily wrong. They had that information very early on. It's less information than what the next person had, but yeah, that would be considered an expert. And even if my staff would probably not call that person as a testifying expert because we know that the information they had was incomplete, defense counsel could always call them. And,
I have a question about the
yes.
sniff test. So on the lower level part of the sniff test, when it's in our office with our staff, are they ever called? Because if they're not called, why couldn't we just be on that same level and not have to go through all the expert?
It's very rare that they're called, but they know who those folks are. I mean, they're disclosed. There's a sheet that goes through, and it's very perfunctory. It's a form, and it's filled out, and the identity of that person is on there, and they're rarely called because they have such little information, but they can't be called.
That would be a great process,
They
or
can't be
part of the
called.
process for the PA to be involved in, I think, where, they could just be part of the screening and help, like you said, give valuable information on how to direct the investigation, on the right questions to ask. And it might actually limit your amount of work that you need to do on the case if you know exactly what to look for or what not to look for. Yeah. And then it wouldn't be on the expert witness level and involve all sorts of layers of training. It could just be something more unofficial.
I would argue, again, I agree with all the positives. The concern is you have someone who's not an expert reviewing this case. Certainly the defense is never going to have a complaint if they're excluded, if they don't have to do anything. However, if we based on a non-expert screen, do not proceed with the disciplinary action, and this person goes out and kills 3 more people, and it could have been picked up, that's what you have to risk. So you have to be very careful by dumbing down the expert credentials, because you don't want to miss something, because you don't want anybody to be hurt, number one. But number two, if you miss it, and the public is going to say, well, look at that. They let that person off because their expert was useless.
Well,
so it's a balance always. But I'm saying
And
there's
it's a
many
balance of
positives, yeah.
information.
So you want to be cautious
Right.
by not
I think it's important to point out that we're not trying to take anything away. We're just looking for concordance.
I agree, but I'm just saying, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and I think we need to be cautious that we don't fall prey to that. 'Cause I agree with you. As you've discussed, I said, yeah, this is good. There's more information, as Ms. Castro said, that we can glean from your special area. So we're gonna be cautious that we don't fall into the unintended consequences area, where we might unintentionally be under some scrutiny.
I agree with those comments.
There's a Business and Professions Code section 159.5 that basically has, there's a D/I, there's our Division of Investigation under DCA, and within that is the HQI, the Health Quality Investigation section, and they handle PA complaints. So whatever the board decides what kind of action they want to take, it's going to have to be routed at some point through them, because they're the ones who are going to have to hire the consultants for the PA, and to figure out what the system is going to look like. If we really need to look into how much consulting we would need to do with the medical board to figure out, because basically anything the PA board does that's going to change, the medical board's going to want to chime in on. So just want to make sure that that we just kind of think about that part of it. So it's definitely good to consider what action you want to take and, vote on it and do all of that. But just so you know, down the line, it's going to be a lot of talking to D/I and kind of figuring that out.
Right, because
What if it was just at the complaint level? When we get the initial complaint.
Right.
And we've decided at that point we need to have a medical consultant to take a look at it prior to sending it to investigation. Would that level be okay?
Possibly. I think that a good way to go on this, at least from my perspective, and on what I would need to do, I would need to do a little bit of legal research to find out what restrictions the board might have and what options there are from a legal perspective on how to go forward. I'm obviously not prepared right now to talk about that, but I'm happy to look into it.
Well, as you know, I'm meeting with the medical board this week, so certainly this will be part of my report, I presume. And I'll just basically, I kind of drafted something that basically at the PA board level, a concern was expressed that the use of MD expert reviewer for PA quality of care case may introduce unnecessary bias against the PA in the process, and the board's going to investigate the use of a PA in the early investigatory process. Would that be a reasonable discussion? Because that way I'll let the board know this is a topic, and so whoever's preparing my report, please add something that effect.
If you could just be sure to add that there's not an intent to remove the physician review, to add a PA.
Yeah, okay, great. So let's make sure we add that in there as we create this document, yeah.
But the point is, well taken, that HQU would be involved because it would involve bringing that person in to review records on the premises or make arrangements for them to review the documents in order to be able to assess that case and make the recommendation back.
So can I make a motion, or is there? Okay, so the motion would be to direct board staff to work with council to investigate what steps would be needed to introduce a PA reviewer into the complaint process.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Further discussion? Question for Lynn. At the time the complaint comes to you, is there enough information for the PA reviewer to look at?
Yes, because when CCU receives a complaint, they do the initial background. They get the medical records, they get the statement from the PAs, they get the statement from whoever is complaining. So yes, there's enough.
Okay. Further questions from the board? Public comment?
Thank you, Teresa Anderson, on behalf of California Academy of PAs. I would just like to point out a couple of things. I think that PAs should be involved all the way along at every step, not just the beginning. We we're looking at team-based care, and anytime that we are assessing team-based care, it should be team-based review. So I think when we really, really get down to it, that's a critical piece. Have PAs in it from the beginning, middle, and to the end. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Maybe modify the motion to include at which steps having a PA in the process would be most beneficial. So how to introduce them to the process and at which steps they would be most beneficial to have a PA reviewer.
Who seconded?
I did.
You did. You concur with the amendment?
I concur.
Okay. Further comments? In my long ago days on the board, I am 90% sure we had physician assistant reviewers that reviewed cases and actually provided a written report and ultimately had to testify at an administrative law judge hearing. So it existed at one point in time. I don't know what happened to it. So if we go back probably 10 years ago, it was there. Okay, I will call the roll then.
Comment. Sorry, may I comment?
Yes.
Jed introduced an interesting point about the potential of having 2 reviews and seeing where there's discordance between the views of a PA and an MD. I think it's a really interesting question, and we would be best served if we learned about any such discordance. And I know we're not at that step yet, but because I may not be on the board for long, I just wanted to share this idea. If down the road the board works to establish a process by which there would be a secondary review from a PA, that you figure out a way to capture any discordance, that perhaps request a report back at some interval from the Attorney General's office about any such discordance, because it may affect how the board is thinking about potential regulations and oversight, and as well as this particular process.
Would the Attorney General's office be able to provide that information, or when you're in an ongoing investigation?
We'd be happy to continue that discussion. We don't vertically enforce all your investigations, so we would be able to opine on the few that we do vertically enforce. Another place where we would be able to see that would be at the referral level. When we get a direct client referral without vertical enforcement, it's on the right side of your sheet. And we would review it at that point. And actually, when we review it and return it to our client, we oftentimes will take the pains to explain, look, this expert opinion said this, and this other expert opinion said that, and it just doesn't jive. And therefore, we're not going to file this case. There's usually what's going on in that communication. If we file it, then we did not find discordance, and if there is, it's something that we were able to rectify and still proceed forward. So it would really only be those review returns for more investigation, review rejects, which we are going to be tracking. So as it turns out, it may be something that would not be as difficult and as previously it would have been. So we're going to track that metric, whether it's for discordant expert opinions. I don't know. It can be for any reason, but we would just review those letters and then scrub them of identities, because our PAs are, they get to benefit from confidential investigations. So you wouldn't know who they were. You would just know it resulted in a non-filing. So nothing was filed. So I think it's doable, and I'm happy to continue that discussion with Lynn and her staff.
Okay, thank you. Further comments? Additional public comments? I wish you guys would sit up closer.
Okay. I'm just gonna try to get this out in the clearest possible way. A couple times we talked a little bit about credibility, and I'm struggling with that a little bit because we've talked about perceived bias, we've talked about credibility, and I think it's worth just saying there's a bias, and the idea that one profession is credible and the other is not in an investigation is a problem for me. I think that we have to call that out, address it, and include PAs.
I agree.
And just to clarify what I said, because it's been misunderstood, the experts are supposed to come in and testify as to the standard of care. This is the standard of care. Here are the facts of this case. Here's my answer. Did they deviate, or are they grossly negligent, repeatedly negligent, or incompetent? So that is a straight shot of this is the medicine, these are the facts, and this is how the facts apply to the medicine and the result that this person act appropriately. Credibility determinations are not that. Credibility determinations that we see experts do are biasing. They say, I don't believe this PA. I believe this other witness. That is exactly what our staff excludes, because that is almost the definition of bias. You're taking a side, and that is not the expert's realm. They're not supposed to take sides. They're supposed to look at the case in front of them and very clinically and unemotionally come to a determination. Again, these are people, they're not robots, but sometimes you do see it. So our lawyers are tasked with excluding and not considering that and considering the medicine, and when impossible, and it can happen, we say we need another expert. This expert is biased because they don't believe the evidence. They have to receive the evidence and not question it. It's like, this is what this person said, this is what this other person said, here's what the medical records say, what do you think? Rather than take sides and not advocate.
That's kind of the whole point, is that there is, whether intentional or unintentional, there probably is some bias where PAs are concerned, because your physician reviewer knows that they are reviewing a PA case. And just like there are good and bad physicians, there are PAs that are more skilled and less skilled than others. But because the letters behind a PA's name are not MD or DO, there is some inherent bias there.
And that's what we try to exclude when we review the expert opinions. And you'll see it too, even with they went to this school or that school.
So what harm would there be in having a PA review a case?
There's no harm.
So, okay, that's perfect.
But I want to stress that bias is already ruled out with the expert opinions that we have when possible, and we obtain a new expert or not. I mean, it's really up to the assessment of the case, and that expert is not used again if they really can't withhold that editorializing of where this person went to school. We see it sometimes with foreign medical graduates. That's not an appropriate biasing. It's like, oh, they went outside of the United States, so therefore they must not be as good as American doctors. We understand that bias and we identify it. And we do get on the phone with these experts to find out, or we don't, the investigators do, and we ask them certain questions. We say, leaving aside that, we want to know what you think. And sometimes they're not salvageable and you don't have a case referred. So that because of that issue.
But you do agree that there's no harm in having an additional review by a PA, correct?
It depends on what level, and it depends on whether I go to hearing or not, because ALJs will make their own, it's not biased, but they will measure the qualifications, background, and resume of the testifying expert and about all of the experts. And sometimes but that's your job. You can non-adopt, you can read the demeanor, attitude, everything that the judges put forth in the order to assess whether you agree with the judge or not. So you can non-adopt and take more evidence, do any number of things. So we take pains to try and identify those, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't do a better job of identifying them with some help from a PA.
Yes? More public comment?
More public comment, but I moved to the front. In addition to any bias there might be, there's tons of ignorance, as we all know. And Mr. Schultz from the medical board was in here a few years ago and talked about his investigators and the whole system that don't understand PAs and the collaborative environment. And so he bought a bunch of books, 90 of the legal handbooks for his investigators, which that was 5 or 6 years ago. But there is a lot of ignorance, so I think a PA in the room or testifying or writing something would help because they just don't understand how PAs practice. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just add one more comment?
Yeah.
I understand that we all understand about bias, inherent or otherwise, but the point was that you mentioned standard of care. It seems as though in your definition, in your explanation, one camp knew standard of care and one camp did not. And so I want to make sure that that is not the issue, because I understand about bias, inherent or otherwise, but you know, in your explanation, you mentioned standard of care, and PAs do know standard of care as well as MDs or DOs. So that's my point.
Okay. Any more comment? Or call the vote? Dr. Alexander?
Aye. This has been very interesting discussion. Aye, though.
Okay. Jennifer Calquist?
Aye.
Sonia Early?
Aye.
Xavier Escobar Acosta?
Aye.
Jed Grant?
Aye.
Catherine Hazelton?
Aye.
Xavier Martinez?
Aye.
Robert Sachs, aye. Mary Valencia?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. So we will direct staff. How many people are hungry?
Can we have lunch for less than an hour so we can get back
I
to
second
the
that.
agenda? Yeah.
I'm thinking it's Tracy.
Run over on a few things.
No, that's Marina. I have to send an email to Marina. I think it's Tracy.
Okay.
And that's gonna be lengthy, so I wouldn't even go there. She's gonna be talking about this.
So are we adjourning?
No, not that one,
Oh.
probably this. She's gonna
Okay.
chime in.
All right, we will break for lunch until 1:30.